Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. The first time the motion light kicked on, I was rinsing a mug at the sink. The window over the counter faced the backyard, and the sudden white flood made the glass flare. I thought it was a raccoon. We got them a lot. I dried my hands, leaned closer, and saw nothing but the fence and the patchy grass lit up like a stage. The light shut off after about 30 seconds. I shrugged and went back to the mug. It happened again 10 minutes later. Same thing. Bright light, same corner of the yard. No movement. No sound. I watched the lights stay on, then click off again. I remember feeling annoyed more than anything. The sensor was new. I'd installed it myself after someone rummaged through a neighbor's car last winter. When it went on a third time, I grabbed my phone and opened the security app. The backyard camera fed straight to it. I scrolled back to the first alert. The clip showed the yard going from dark to bright. Nothing crossed the frame. No animals, no shadows, no bugs flying close to the lens. Just the light snapping on and the grass glowing, then off. I replayed it twice, then checked the second clip. Same thing. I stepped outside onto the back porch. It was late spring, cool but not cold, clear sky, no wind. The kind of quiet where you can hear distant traffic but nothing close. I scanned the yard, then the fence line. Everything looked normal. I stood there long enough that the porch light turned off on its own. That's when the backyard light came on again. It lit up the yard right in front of me. I flinched and looked straight at the spot where the sensor was aimed. Still nothing. I waved my hand slowly. No change. I stepped forward. The light stayed on. I stepped back, stayed on. After a while, it shut off. I felt stupid standing there, but I stayed another minute, looking up this time. The sky was dark and clear, stars sharp, no clouds, no planes. I went back inside. Around midnight, I was half asleep on the couch when my phone buzzed. Motion detected. I didn't get up right away. I just opened the app and watched the live feed. The light was on again. Yard empty. As I watched, something flickered at the top edge of the frame. It was so quick, I thought it was a glitch. I scrubbed back and slowed it down. For 2 frames, the sky brightened. Not like lightning. More like someone took a dim photo and turned the exposure up. The brightness didn't spill onto the fence or the ground. It was just there, above the yard. Then it was gone. I checked the timestamp. Same second the motion alert triggered. The next night, it happened again. Same time, just after midnight. Motion alert, light on, empty yard, brief flash above the fence line, high enough that the camera barely caught it. I didn't go outside that time. I sat on the couch, lights off, watching the live feed. The light stayed on longer than usual, then clicked off. I slept badly and woke up with that dull, wired feeling like I hadn't really rested. By the 4th night, I started waiting for it. I made coffee around 11 and sat at the table with my phone face up. The house felt different at night now, too quiet. Even the fridge sounded loud. At 12:07 a.m., the phone buzzed. The light came on. The yard was empty. I watched the sky above the fence. Nothing happened for a few seconds. Then the faint flash came again. This time it lasted longer, maybe half a second. The brightness wasn't uniform. It had a soft edge, like light diffused through fog, but there was no fog. The camera didn't adjust or refocus. It just showed the sky brightening, then returning to normal. No sound, no reflection. The yard itself didn't change at all. I realized my heart was pounding. I hadn't noticed until then. I checked the rest of the footage frame by frame. No movement, no object, just the light and the flash. The next day, I mentioned it to my sister on the phone. I kept it casual, told her the motion sensor was acting weird. She joked about ghosts and told me to reset it. I did, twice. Changed the sensitivity, adjusted the angle, cleaned the camera lens. That night, the light still came on. The flash still happened. On the 6th night, I went outside again. I stood in the yard before midnight, phone in my pocket, just listening. Crickets. A dog barking far away. Everything normal. When the light came on, it startled me, even though I was waiting for it. I looked straight up this time. I didn't see the flash directly. What I noticed instead was the absence of stars in one small patch overhead. Like something darker than the sky was there, blocking them. It wasn't sharp-edged, more like a smudge. I stared at it, trying to make sense of it. Then the stars came back, and the yard went dark as the light clicked off. I don't know how long I stood there after that, long enough that my legs started to ache. I went inside and locked the door, which I hadn't been doing before. The camera caught the flash anyway. Same timing, same place. After that, I stopped going into the yard at night. I started closing the blinds earlier. The light kept triggering for another week. Always after midnight. Always with that faint, quick brightening in the sky. No footage ever showed anything else. Then one night, it didn't happen. I stayed up late, waiting. Midnight came and went. Nothing. I checked the app anyway. No alerts. I slept through the night for the first time in days. It hasn't happened since. The motion light still works. It turns on when I take the trash out or when a cat cuts through the yard. The camera picks those up just fine. But sometimes, when I'm washing a mug at the sink late at night, I catch myself glancing up the sky through the window, checking that the stars all look the way they should. I woke up because my arm had gone numb. I'd fallen asleep on my back with one hand resting on my chest, phone somewhere near my pillow. The room was dark. In that way, it gets right before morning when the night hasn't let go yet, but the air feels thinner. I remember blinking a few times, trying to get my bearings, and noticing right away that something was off. My phone screen was on. That alone wasn't weird. I sometimes fell asleep watching videos or scrolling. What stopped me was the angle. The phone was propped up against my water glass, tilted straight up, camera lens aimed at the ceiling. The camera app was open. I hadn't done that. I lay there for a few seconds, not moving, just staring at the faint glow of the screen. My ceiling fan was still. No light from outside, no noise except the low hum of my fridge down the hall. I picked up the phone. The screen dimmed as I touched it, like it had been sitting idle for a while. The camera was still active, front-facing, recording nothing but drywall. I felt that slow, creeping tension start in my chest, the kind that doesn't spike, just settles in and spreads. I swiped out of the camera and opened my photos. The most recent image was time-stamped 2:14 a.m. I took it at 2:14 a.m. According to the phone, I tapped it. At first, it just looked like a picture of my ceiling. Same hairline crack near the corner, same smoke detector shadow. But then my eyes adjusted and I saw the glow. It was faint, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. A soft, pale wash of light spread across the ceiling, not centered, more like it was bleeding in from above the frame. Not a circle, not a beam. Just brightness, like something was illuminating the room from a place that didn't make sense. It didn't look like headlights. It wasn't warm like a lamp. It had no clear source. I zoomed in. The grain got worse, but the glow stayed consistent. I checked the next photo. There wasn't one, just the single image. My phone said I'd slept for almost 6 hours straight. No interruptions, no screen unlocks, no app usage except the camera. I sat up in bed and listened. The house felt wrong. Not silent exactly, but muted, like someone had turned the volume down on everything. I couldn't hear the usual night sounds outside. No cars on the road, no wind, no insects. I swung my legs out of bed and stood up. The floor was cold, grounding in a way I needed. I walked to the bedroom door and opened it slowly. The hallway was dark, same as always. I checked the living room, the kitchen, the back door. Everything was locked. No lights on, no signs anyone had been there. When I came back to the bedroom, I noticed something else. My curtains were parted, not all the way, just enough that a thin slice of window was exposed. I always closed them completely. The streetlight outside shone straight into my room otherwise, and I hated that. I stood there, phone in hand, staring at the gap. I pulled the curtain closed. Nothing happened. No movement outside, no sudden noise, just darkness. I didn't go back to sleep. The next morning, I showed the photo to my sister, Mara, over coffee. She frowned at it, tilted her head. "Probably some kind of reflection," she said, "or your phone adjusting exposure." "From what?" I asked. The lights were off, curtains closed. She shrugged. Phones do weird stuff at night. That was the end of it, as far as she was concerned. I tried to let it go. For a few days, I managed. I told myself I'd half woken up, opened the camera without remembering, and caught some random artifact. Stress. Lack of sleep. Nothing more. Then it happened again. Same setup. Same time window. I woke up just before my alarm this time, that same pressure in my chest like I'd been holding my breath for too long. My phone was on the nightstand, angled up. Camera app, open. I didn't move right away. I lay there and stared at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it was coincidence. I reached for the phone. New photo. Taken at 2:16 a.m. This one was brighter. The glow wasn't spread out anymore. It had shape now. Still soft, still pale, but more concentrated, like a patch of light hovering just out of view. The edges were uneven, almost feathered. I checked the metadata, no flash, no edits. I checked my activity log. Nothing. That day, I started paying attention to little things. The way my ears rang sometimes when the house was quiet. The way my dog, Reese, would stop mid-step and stare at the ceiling for no reason. That night, I didn't go to bed right away. I stayed up past midnight, sitting on the couch with the lights off, phone in my hand, watching the ceiling. Nothing happened. At 1:30, I started to feel stupid. I went to bed. I woke up at 2:17 a.m. exactly. Not groggy, not confused, fully awake like someone had flipped a switch. The phone was already angled. The camera was already open. This time, I didn't reach for it. I lay there, staring up, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. There was a faint brightness above me. Not enough to light the room, but enough that I could tell the darkness wasn't uniform anymore. It felt like the air itself was glowing, just barely. I felt pressure in my ears, like being underwater. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The room went dark. The pressure vanished. The quiet rushed back in, sharp and uncomfortable. I grabbed the phone. The photo from 2:17 showed the brightest glow yet. It filled almost the entire frame now, like something directly above the house had been there, close enough to matter. I sat up and swung my legs out of bed, breath shaking. I checked the window. The curtains were parted again. Outside, the sky was darker than it should have been for that hour. No stars, no clouds, just flat, empty black. I watched for a long time. Nothing moved. The glow never came back. It hasn't happened since. No more photos. No more camera app opening on its own. But some nights I wake up around 2, wide awake, with that same tight feeling in my chest. I don't reach for my phone anymore. I just lie there, staring at the ceiling, waiting to see if the darkness changes. I was sitting on the back steps with my jacket zipped up, staring at the sky because I couldn't sleep. It was late enough that the neighborhood was quiet, but not dead. Somebody's dryer thumping a block over, a car passing every now and then. The air was cold and still, the kind that makes sound travel farther than it should. I lived outside of town then, just far enough that the streetlights didn't completely drown out the stars. I'd started doing this thing where I picked one star and watched it until my eyes got tired. It helped slow my thoughts down. If you stare long enough, the sky starts to feel less huge and more like a ceiling. I picked one low in the sky, just above the tree line. It wasn't especially bright, but it stood out because it didn't twinkle much. It felt steady, solid. I remember thinking it was probably a planet, but I didn't bother checking. I watched it for a while, and so waft breathing fog into my sleeves, counting my exhales. Nothing happened at first. The night felt normal. Too normal, honestly. Then the star moved. Not fast, not sudden. It slid sideways, smooth and quiet, like someone nudging a chess piece across a board. Just a little bit at first. I thought it was my eyes, so I blinked hard and looked away at the roofline, then back. It was still drifting. That was the moment my stomach dropped. Not panic, more like confusion so deep it felt physical. Stars don't do that. Planes blink, satellites glide. This didn't glide. It adjusted, corrected itself slightly, like it was staying level with something I couldn't see. I stood up without realizing I was doing it. The wood step creaked under my boot, loud as a gunshot. The star kept moving. I whispered no under my breath, like that would somehow stop it. It slid another inch across the sky, then slowed. For a second, just one, I couldn't tell if I was looking at movement or if my brain was filling it in. The star dimmed slightly, not enough to vanish, just enough to feel thinner, and then it blended back into the sky. That's the only way I can describe it. It didn't turn off, it didn't shoot away. The point of light softened, spread out, and suddenly it was just gone. Or maybe it was still there, and my eyes couldn't separate it from everything else anymore. I stood there with my mouth open, staring at the spot where it had been. The sky looked normal, completely normal. I checked other stars, comparing positions, trying to convince myself I'd picked the wrong reference point. I hadn't. My hands were shaking, not badly, but enough that I noticed. I pulled my phone out and opened a star map app, feeling stupid even as I did it. The app showed the sky exactly as it should be. No gaps, no missing points. I stayed outside another 10 minutes, then 20. Nothing else happened. The cold started to creep through my jacket, and my rational brain slowly clawed its way back in. I went inside and locked the door, which I didn't usually do that early. I stood in the kitchen for a bit, just listening. The house sounded the same as it always did. Fridge humming, pipes ticking. I told myself it was an illusion. Fatigue, eye strain, maybe a satellite at a weird angle. I repeated that explanation until it almost sounded reasonable. Almost. The next night, I went back out. I didn't plan to. I told myself I wouldn't. But around the same time, my body just expected something, like a habit I hadn't meant to form. It was cloudier that night. The stars were patchy, coming and going behind thin gray streaks. I sat on the steps again, hugging a mug I didn't really want, scanning the sky without focusing too hard. I didn't see the same star. At least, I don't think I did. What I did notice was how quiet it felt, not silent, just muted. The crickets had stopped, which happens sometimes, but even the distant road noise felt dampened, like someone had closed a door somewhere far away. Then one of the stars near the center of my view dimmed, not disappeared, just dulled like a light behind fog. I leaned forward, squinting. It shifted sideways. This one moved faster. Not dramatically, but enough that I couldn't pretend it was my eyes. It slid, paused, then slid again, always smooth, always controlled. No blinking, no trail. I felt that same pressure in my chest, like when an elevator stops too abruptly. I pulled my phone up again, hands clumsy, and as soon as the screen lit my face, the star stopped moving. It just stayed there. I lowered the phone slowly, watching the sky over the top edge. The star held still for a few seconds, then faded back into the background exactly like the night before. I didn't stay outside after that. I went straight to bed, locked the door again, and lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying it over and over, every time I thought I had it pinned down. Some natural explanation, some trick of light, it slipped away. Over the next week, it happened 3 more times. Not every night. Not at the same spot in the sky. Always subtle. Always brief. A star that drifted when it shouldn't. A point of light that thinned and vanished without actually going anywhere. Once I was with someone else. My neighbor Mark was over, helping me move a broken shelf out to the curb. We finished up and stood there talking, both of us looking up without really meaning to. I saw at first, a star just above the power lines, steady and bright. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "Do you see that one?" Mark followed my gaze. "Yeah." The star slid, just a little. "Is it moving?" I asked. He frowned. "I don't think so." It moved again, a clean sideways shift, unmistakable. "There," I said. "That?" Mark squinted. "I don't see." The star dimmed and blended into the sky mid-sentence. Mark looked at me. "See what?" I didn't answer right away. I was still staring at the empty space, my heart pounding so hard it felt loud. "Never mind," I said finally. "Probably nothing." He shrugged and went back inside. I stayed out a bit longer, staring at a sky that suddenly felt like it was paying attention to me. After that, I stopped going outside at night. I closed the curtains earlier. I kept lights on. I tried not to look up when I walked to my car. It sounds ridiculous, but there was something about those movements that felt intentional. Not directed at me exactly. More like reactive, like when you notice someone across a room notice you back. Weeks passed. Nothing happened. My nerves settled. I started sleeping better. The explanations I'd rehearsed hardened into something I could almost believe. Then one night, lying in bed, I noticed the light in the room shift. Not brighter, not darker, just thinner. Like the air itself had changed density. I sat up, heart racing, and the feeling vanished instantly. Everything went back to normal. The house creaked. The heater kicked on. I didn't look out the window. I don't know what those stars were. I don't know if they were stars at all, or something passing in front of them, or something using them as cover. I don't know why they moved the way they did, or why they seemed to stop when I tried to capture them. All I know is that sometimes when I catch myself staring at the sky for too long, I feel that same quiet pressure in my chest, and I force myself to look away before anything has the chance to move again. I woke up because my wrist felt tight. Not painful, just noticeable, like the band had shifted while I was sleeping. I rolled onto my back and stared at the ceiling for a second, trying to remember what woke me. The room was darker than usual, but not fully dark. There was a faint gray-blue glow leaking around the edges of the curtains. I reached over and checked my phone. 2:18 a.m. That didn't line up with the light outside. Normally, my street was pitch black at that hour. No street lights on my block, just porch lights here and there. This glow felt more like early morning, but it was the wrong color. Too flat, too even. I noticed my smartwatch screen was on. That alone wasn't weird. Sometimes it lit up if I moved, but I hadn't moved much. I lifted my wrist closer to my face. It was on the activity screen. My heart rate graph was still visible, scrolling slowly. I tapped it, squinting. The brightness seemed higher than normal, like the watch thought it was daytime. The graph showed steady activity from about 140 to just after 210. Steps. Heart rate elevated. Calories burned. I frowned. "That's not right," I muttered. I hadn't been out of bed. I lived alone. The watch was snug enough that it wouldn't register random motion. And even if it did, steps didn't just log themselves. I scrolled back through the timeline. At 1:42 a.m., it logged me as standing. At 1:47, walking. At 1:53, light exercise. I felt a cold prickle run up my arms. I sat up and looked around the room. Everything was where it should be. My shoes were by the door. My keys were on the dresser. No signs I'd gone anywhere. The glow outside caught my attention again. I swung my legs out of bed and walked to the window. The floor felt colder than usual under my feet. Not drafty, just colder. I pulled the curtain back an inch. The sky was wrong. It wasn't bright like sunrise. It was this dull, washed-out gray, like someone had turned the saturation down on the night. There were no visible clouds, but I couldn't see stars either. The whole sky looked evenly lit, as if the city glow had spread everywhere at once. The houses across the street were dark. No porch lights, no headlights, no movement. I checked my phone again to make sure I hadn't misread the time. 2:19 a.m. I stood there for a full minute, just watching. The light didn't change. It didn't pulse or move. It just existed. I became aware of how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet. The kind of quiet you get when sound is missing. I couldn't hear the hum of traffic from the main road half a mile away. No distant train horn. No wind in the trees. I listened for my refrigerator. Nothing. I went into the hallway and flipped the kitchen light on. It came on instantly, which was a relief. The familiar yellow glow grounded things a little. I glanced back at my watch. My heart rate was climbing. I walked through the house, turning on lights as I went. Living room, bathroom, everything worked. No power outage, no flickering. When I looked out the living room window, the sky was still that same flat gray. I checked the watch activity again. The movement stopped at 2:11 a.m. Exactly. After that, nothing, like I'd gone completely still. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I sleepwalked. I hadn't done that since I was a kid, but stress can do weird things. I'd been working late, not sleeping great. But sleepwalking didn't explain the sky. I didn't go back to bed. I sat on the couch with the TV on low until the sky finally darkened again around 3. Not gradually, it just dimmed, like someone lowered a brightness slider. When morning came, everything looked normal. Blue sky, sunlight, birds loud enough to be annoying. I almost convinced myself it had been a dream, until I checked the watch again. The activity data was still there. I showed it to my coworker Erin later that day during lunch. "That's creepy," she said, scrolling through it. "You sure you didn't go for a walk or something?" "At 2 in the morning?" I said. "In my pajamas?" She shrugged. "Maybe you forgot." I didn't forget. That night, I tightened the watch band and turned on sleep tracking, something I usually didn't bother with. I also set my phone to record audio, mostly as a joke to myself. I went to bed around 11:30. I woke up to the same tight feeling on my wrist. This time, I didn't move right away. My eyes were closed, but I could see the glow through my eyelids. Same flat brightness, same even tone. I focused on staying still, heart hammering. The air felt heavy, like pressure before a storm, but there was no smell, no wind. My watch vibrated once, just a single soft buzz. I opened my eyes. The room was dim, but not fully dark. The digital clock on my nightstand was visible without its backlight. 2:14 a.m. I lifted my wrist slowly. The The watch face showed my heart rate spiking, then settling. The activity ring was filling. I hadn't moved. I turned my head toward the window. The glow outside was stronger this time, bright enough that I could see the outline of the fence in my backyard through the curtains. Still no shadows, still no visible source. I swung my legs out of bed and stood up. The moment my feet hit the floor, the watch vibrated again. Longer this time, like a notification. Activity detected, the screen read. That was when fear really set in. I crossed the room and pulled the curtain back fully. The sky looked close. That's the only way I can describe it, like it had dropped lower, pressing down on the neighborhood. The glow wasn't coming from above exactly. It felt like it was everywhere at once, like the air itself was lit. I stepped back from the window, suddenly dizzy. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. I reached for my phone on the nightstand and unlocked it. The screen lit up my hands and chest. The moment it did, the glow outside dimmed slightly. Not gone, just weaker. I raised the phone toward the window. As soon as the screen faced the glass, the glow vanished. The sky snapped back to normal darkness, stars visible, porch lights back on. The usual orange haze near the horizon. Sound returned all at once. A car passed somewhere nearby. The refrigerator kicked on. My ears rang briefly, like after a loud noise. I stood there shaking. The watch buzzed again. The activity stopped at 2:16 a.m. I checked the audio recording later that morning. Most of it was just silence and the sound of my breathing. But from 1:58 to 2:16, there was a low, steady hum in the background. Not loud enough to notice in the moment, but unmistakable on playback. It wasn't electrical buzz or white noise. It had a rhythm to it, like something rotating slowly. I took the watch off after that. I stopped wearing it to bed. I even tried sleeping without my phone in the room. The glow still came back once more, a week later, but weaker. I woke up to the same dull brightness and a sense that I'd been doing something just before waking, something physical, like walking or standing, but the memory was gone the moment I tried to focus on it. That night, the watch was on my dresser. In the morning, it showed activity anyway. I don't wear it anymore. Sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, the room feels just a little too visible, like my eyes don't need as much light as they should. When that happens, I stay very still and don't look at the window. By morning, everything is normal again. At least, it looks that way. I woke up already sitting halfway up in bed, heart going hard like I'd been running. The room was dark and quiet. The kind of quiet where you can hear your own breathing too clearly. I had that exact feeling you get when you're sure someone's in the room with you, even though you can't see anything. I stayed still and listened. Nothing moved. No floorboards, no doors. The house was the same as it always was at night, old, creaky, and settled. But the feeling didn't go away. It was strong enough that my eyes kept drifting to the corner near the dresser, like I expected something to step out of it. I turned my head toward the window instead. That's when I noticed the light. It wasn't bright. It wasn't even clearly defined, just a faint glow outside, low to the ground, like someone holding a dim lantern far away. It sat just beyond the tree line at the back of my property, barely visible through the branches. As soon as I focused on it, it moved. Not fast. It slid sideways and dipped like it was backing away. By the time I swung my legs off the bed and crossed the room, it was already retreating behind the trees, shrinking until it was gone. I pressed my face close to the glass and scanned the yard. Nothing. No flashlights. No headlights. No movement in the brush. The trees stood still, their outlines sharp against the sky. I checked the time on my phone. 3:41 a.m. I stood there longer than I meant to, waiting for something else to happen. It didn't. By the time I went back to bed, the feeling had dulled but not disappeared. I slept in short, shallow stretches until my alarm went off. In the morning, the yard looked normal. Dew on the grass, fallen leaves along the fence line. I walked the perimeter with a mug of coffee, half expecting to find footprints or some sign that someone had been back there. There was nothing. I live alone on a few acres outside a small town in western Pennsylvania. My nearest neighbor, Mark, is about a quarter mile down the road. We wave when we see each other, borrow tools once in a while. That's it. I told myself it was probably a car on the road beyond the woods, or my brain filling in gaps after a bad dream. That explanation worked until the next night. The second night, I didn't wake up suddenly. I drifted out of sleep slowly, aware first of a low pressure in my ears, like the start of a headache. Then the same feeling crept in, that sense of being watched. I didn't move right away. I kept my eyes closed, listening. That's when I noticed the sound was wrong. Not silence, something softer, like the house had been wrapped in insulation. The usual background noise, distant highway hum, insects, the refrigerator cycling, was muted, flattened. I opened my eyes and turned my head toward the window. The glow was back. This time it was a little higher, hovering just above the tree line. Still dim, still without any clear source. It pulsed once, faintly, like a slow breath. I got out of bed faster than I meant to and crossed the room. The floor creaked loudly under my feet, and the sound seemed to snap the moment in half. The light dropped straight down and vanished behind the trees. Immediately, the night sounds rushed back in. Crickets, wind, the distant bark of a dog. I stood there with my hands on the window frame, trying to steady my breathing. The next day at work, I couldn't focus. I work at a small print shop in town, mostly alone in the afternoons. Every time a machine kicked on behind me, I flinched. I checked my phone more than usual, half expecting a missed call or message explaining something I didn't understand yet. I didn't tell anyone. Saying it out loud felt like giving it more weight. That night, I stayed up later than usual. I watched TV with the lights on and didn't go to bed until after midnight. When I finally did fall asleep, it was deep and heavy. I woke again at 3:41. The number hit me immediately. Same time. This time the light was closer. It hovered between two trees at the edge of the yard, low enough that I could make out the way it blurred slightly against the branches behind it. It didn't pulse, it just hung there. My chest felt tight, like I'd run out of room to breathe. I raised my phone and snapped a photo through the glass. The screen showed nothing but darkness. When I looked back up, the light slid backward, slow and smooth until the trees swallowed it. I didn't sleep after that. The following morning, Mark drove up while I was taking out the trash. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Lights were on late." "Yeah," I said automatically. "Just couldn't sleep." He hesitated. "You been seeing anything weird back here at night?" My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" I asked. He scratched his beard. "A couple nights ago, I let my dog out and thought I saw a glow near your trees. Figured it was you." I didn't answer right away. I could hear my pulse in my ears. "It wasn't," I said finally. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's what I figured." After that, the nights changed. Sometimes I didn't wake up at all. Other times I woke with that pressure in my ears, but no light outside. Once I woke to find my phone unlocked on the nightstand, camera app open, pointed at the ceiling. The light came back 3 more times that week, always around the same time, always retreating as soon as I moved. One night I stepped outside. The air felt thick, like it had weight. The yard was darker than usual. The stars dimmed above my house, but brighter farther away. I stood barefoot in the grass, heart pounding, and waited. Nothing appeared. After a minute, the pressure in my ears eased. The stars returned to normal. I went back inside, shaking. The light never crossed into the yard. It never approached the house. It stayed just far enough away to be seen, then gone. A week later, it stopped. No light, no pressure, no waking at 3:41. Life slid back into place. Work, sleep, quiet nights. Sometimes when I stand at the window before bed, I look toward the trees and feel that old sense of attention brush past me, faint and fleeting. Nothing shows itself anymore. But every so often, I wake just before dawn with the feeling that something has finished watching and finally left. I was sitting on the roof because it was the only place the mosquitoes couldn't really get to me. My house is a 1-story place at the edge of town, with a shallow pitch and shingles rough enough to sit on without sliding. I'd been doing it for years, drag a lawn chair up there, set a thermos next to me, and watch the sky. I wasn't into astrology or anything. I just liked satellites. They were predictable. Clean little lines of light crossing the dark, doing exactly what they were supposed to do. That night was late August, still warm after sunset, but finally cooling off. No clouds, no wind. The kind of sky that makes you feel small in a calm way. I'd been up there maybe half an hour, counting satellites the way some people count planes. I'd already spotted a few, slow, steady points gliding west to east, fading as they hit Earth's shadow. Nothing unusual. Then I noticed one that seemed hesitant. At first, I thought my eyes were tired. The point of light was faint near the southern edge of my view, moving along a path I'd seen dozens of times before. But something about it felt off. It wasn't quite as smooth as the others. It slowed slightly, then picked up again. I leaned forward in the chair, elbows on my knees, tracking it. It slowed again. I checked my watch, not sure why. Habit, maybe. 10:47 p.m. The satellite crept forward another inch across the sky, then stopped. Not faded, not blinked out, stopped. It hung there, motionless against the stars. I waited for it to dim, expecting it to vanish into shadow, but it stayed bright. Too bright, actually. The contrast made it easier to see than it should have been. I frowned and muttered, "That's not right." Satellites don't stop. Even the slow ones don't just freeze in place like a cursor on a paused video. I shifted in my chair, trying to steady my perspective. Maybe it only looked stopped because it was moving directly toward or away from me. That happens sometimes. It's an illusion. Except then, it started moving backward. Not drifting, not wobbling. Moving back along the same path it had just traveled, like someone rewinding it. I felt a cold tightness creep into my chest. The movement was smooth and controlled, the same speed it had been going forward, just reversed. It passed stars it had already crossed, retracing its exact route. I sat perfectly still, afraid that if I moved, I'd lose track of it, or break whatever fragile alignment was letting me see this. My skin prickled. The night felt too quiet. Even the usual distant highway noise seemed muted. The satellite reversed for maybe 3 seconds. Then it stopped again. I swallowed hard and glanced around the sky, half expecting to see something else moving. Another light, another shape. But everything else stayed normal. Other satellites continued on their paths. Planes blinked red and white far off to the north. The stars didn't care. Only that one point of light was wrong. It sat there, perfectly still. I realized my breathing was shallow, almost held. I forced myself to take a deeper breath, and when I did, I noticed something else. A faint vibration through the roof beneath me. Not strong enough to rattle anything, just a soft hum like standing near a distant generator. I put my palm flat against the shingles. The vibration was real. I looked back at the light. It was still there. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I lifted my phone and aimed the camera at the sky. I didn't zoom. I just held it steady, hoping the point of light would show up. The screen showed stars, but not the satellite. I lowered the phone, heart thudding harder now, and stared at the sky again. The light was still there, plain as day. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay." The vibration under my hand faded. The roof felt solid and dead again. I sat there another long moment, watching that point of light hang in place, refusing to behave. Then, without really deciding to, I looked away. Just a quick glance down toward my backyard, at the dark outline of the shed and the faint glow from my kitchen window. Maybe a second at most. When I looked back up, the satellite was moving normally again. Same direction as before, same steady speed. No hesitation, no reversal, just another obedient object sliding across the sky. I stared after it until it faded into Earth's shadow and disappeared. I didn't move for a long time. Eventually, I checked my watch again, 10:49 p.m. 2 minutes had passed. I climbed down from the roof, slower than usual, my hands shaking just enough to notice. Inside, the house felt too quiet, even though everything was normal. Refrigerator humming, clock ticking, the familiar creak of the hallway floorboard. I sat at the kitchen table and tried to reason it out. Perspective illusion, eye fatigue, some weird coincidence of orbital geometry. But I couldn't get past the reversal. I'd seen satellites flare, vanish, change brightness. I'd never seen one go backward. I didn't sleep much that night. The next evening, I went back up to the roof. I told myself I wasn't looking for anything. I just wanted to prove it wouldn't happen again. The sky was different, slightly hazy, fewer visible stars. I stayed up there an hour, tracking satellites as usual. Everything behaved. Nothing stopped. Nothing reversed. I relaxed a little. A week passed, then another. I almost forgot about it, or at least pushed it far enough back in my mind that it stopped intruding on normal thoughts. Until one night in mid-September. I was back on the roof, earlier this time just after sunset. The sky was still deep blue, not fully dark yet. I'd spotted one satellite already, faint but visible. Then I saw another. Same area of the sky as before, same path. My stomach dropped before anything even happened. I tracked it carefully as it moved. It didn't hesitate at first. It glided along smoothly, just like it should. Then it slowed. I felt that same tightness in my chest, the same sense of the night holding its breath. It slowed more, stopped. I didn't take my eyes off it this time. The vibration returned under me, faint but unmistakable, like the roof was quietly resonating with something above it. The air felt thick, pressing slightly against my ears. The satellite didn't reverse this time. Instead, it drifted sideways. Not much, just enough to notice. A subtle lateral slide, like it was adjusting its position relative to me rather than following its orbital track. I started shaking. "Don't," I whispered, not sure who or what I was talking to. The light stayed put. I had the sudden, overwhelming sense that it knew I was watching it. Not in a dramatic way. Not like being stared at, more like awareness. Like when you realize someone in a room has noticed you noticing them. My phone buzzed in my pocket, nearly making me fall out of the chair. I yanked it out, breath coming fast. No notification, no missed call. When I looked back up, the satellite was moving normally again. Forward. Steady. Predictable. The vibration faded. I climbed down immediately and didn't look back. I haven't gone up on the roof since. I still look at the sky sometimes, from the yard or through windows. I still see satellites, crossing the dark like they always have. They all move the way they're supposed to. But every now and then, when one passes near that same stretch of sky, I get this urge to look away, to break eye contact before anything has the chance to stop. Because the one time I didn't look away, it didn't act like an object anymore. It acted like something that noticed being watched and adjusted. The compass started acting up about an hour into the hike. At first, it was subtle. I stopped to check my position because the trail forked, and I didn't remember seeing a signpost on the map. When I pulled the compass from my pocket, the needle was drifting. Not spinning wildly, just slowly circling like it couldn't decide where north was. I tapped the glass with my finger. Nothing changed. "Great," I muttered, assuming it had finally broken. I'd had it for years, cheap but reliable. I stuck it back in my pocket and took the left fork, which felt right based on the slope and tree line. The hike was in the Bitterroot Range, late October. Cold but clear. Patches of old snow in the shade, crunchy underfoot. The air smelled like pine and wet rock. I'd planned a day hike up to a small summit overlook and back before dark. Another 20 minutes passed before I stopped again. The trail steepened more than I expected, and the wind picked up. I pulled the compass out again, mostly out of habit. The needle was spinning now, not fast. Just a slow, steady rotation, smooth as if it were being guided by something. I held it still, then turned my body. The needle kept circling, completely unconcerned with my movement. I felt a flicker of unease, but I told myself there were mineral deposits up here. Iron-rich rock. I'd heard that could mess with compasses. Still, I checked my phone's GPS. No signal. That wasn't unusual either, but stacked together, it started to get under my skin. I took a breath, zipped my jacket higher, and kept going. The higher I climbed, the quieter it got. Not the peaceful kind of quiet you expect on a mountain. More like the sound had thinned out. The wind was still there, but it didn't carry. My footsteps felt muffled, like the ground was absorbing noise instead of reflecting it. I stopped again and took the compass out. The needle slowed. Then, very deliberately, it stopped spinning and pointed uphill. Not north, not toward the trail. Directly up the slope toward a stretch of rock and scrub that wasn't part of any marked path. I stood there for a long time, staring at it. I turned the compass in my hand. The needle adjusted to stay pointed in the same direction. I rotated my body. Same thing. Uphill. Always uphill. I laughed once, short and uneasy. That's not how this works. I should have turned around. That was the smart thing to do. Weather can change fast up there, and I was alone. But curiosity got the better of me. And if I'm being honest, something about that direction felt important. Not urgent. Just quietly insistent. I decided to climb a little farther, just to the summit. Then I'd head back. The trail faded as I gained elevation, replaced by loose rock and low brush. My legs burned, my breath fogged in front of me. The air temperature dropped enough that my fingers started to ache inside my gloves. And yet, every time I stopped, I noticed something that didn't fit. The cold wasn't biting the way it should have been. My face was exposed, but it didn't sting. The wind brushed past me, but it didn't feel sharp. It was like there was a thin layer of warmth clinging to me, subtle enough that I kept questioning it. I reached the summit just after noon. It wasn't much to look at. A rocky crown with a few stunted trees and a view of rolling peaks in every direction. Snow-dusted ridges stretched out under a pale blue sky. I stepped onto the flat stone at the top and immediately stopped. The air was warm, not hot, not dramatic, just warm, like standing near a sunlit wall after being in the shade. I pulled my glove off and held my hand out. Definitely warmer than the surrounding air. I checked my breath, still fogging. The temperature difference was localized, subtle, but undeniable. I stood there, heart pounding, scanning the area. There was no source, no steam, no vents, just rock, sky, and quiet. The compass in my pocket buzzed softly against my leg. I froze. It wasn't vibrating like a phone, it was more like a faint hum, just enough that I could feel it through the fabric of my pants. I pulled it out with shaking fingers. The needle was locked in place, pointing straight down at the rock beneath my feet. The warmth intensified for a moment, enough that I could feel it through the soles of my boots. The air felt thick, heavy, like the pressure change before a storm, except the sky was perfectly clear. Then the sound started. Not loud, not external. It felt like it was inside my chest, a low, rhythmic pulse, almost like distant machinery heard through layers of earth. Each pulse made my teeth buzz slightly. I wanted to move. I wanted to run downhill and not look back. I couldn't. I don't mean I was paralyzed. My legs worked. I shifted my weight. But every time I tried to take a step, I felt disoriented, like the ground tilted just enough to throw off my balance. I looked up. The sky above the summit looked wrong. The blue was still there, but it lacked depth, like a painted backdrop instead of open space. The clouds at the horizon seemed frozen, stretched thin. Then something passed overhead. I didn't see a shape. What I saw was the absence of clarity. A section of sky darkened slightly, moving smoothly, silently, blotting out detail without casting a shadow. The warmth peaked, the pulsing in my chest sped up, and then nothing. The pressure vanished. The warmth drained away. Sound rushed back into the world all at once. Wind, distant birds, my own ragged breathing. I stumbled forward and nearly fell, catching myself on a boulder. The sky looked normal again. I checked the time. My watch read 12:18. My phone, which suddenly had a faint signal, said 12:05. I stared at both screens, trying to make sense of it. I knew how long I'd been hiking. I knew when I'd reached the summit. There were 13 minutes I couldn't account for. I didn't linger. The descent felt wrong in a different way. The trail seemed unfamiliar, like landmarks were slightly out of place. A fallen log I remembered stepping over was gone. A switchback felt too sharp. By the time I reached my car, my legs were shaking from more than just exertion. I drove home in silence, radio off, windows cracked despite the cold. That night, I noticed my boots were warm to the touch, even hours later. Not damp, not heated by the house. Just warm, like they'd been sitting near a low heat source. The compass hasn't worked right since. Sometimes the needle trembles when I take it out, even in my apartment. Once, briefly, it pointed toward the ceiling. I haven't gone back to that summit, but sometimes when I'm outside on a cold day and the air feels just a little too mild for the weather, I get the sense that the warmth didn't come from the mountain at all, that it passed through it and through me and kept going. I was sitting in the empty lot behind the old Ridgeway Outlet Mall, the one they shut down years ago but never bothered to demolish. The place had become my go-to spot whenever I needed to clear my head during long drives. No traffic, no people, no lights except the ones from passing cars way off on Route 6. It was around 10:30 p.m., late enough that the sky had gone fully dark, but early enough that I wasn't tired yet. I had stopped there because my GPS kept losing signal. I figured I'd sit for a minute, stretch, maybe let my phone reset itself. The air was cool and dry, the kind of early autumn night where sound travels weirdly far. Even the hum from the highway sounded too crisp. I parked near the middle of the cracked asphalt lot. Weed clusters pushed through the pavement here and there, and the building itself sat dark and hollow behind me. I shut the engine off and leaned back in my seat. For a few minutes, everything felt normal. Then my phone buzzed in the cup holder. I picked it up and saw the compass app open, one I hadn't touched in weeks. It must have launched accidentally, or I'd tapped it when I grabbed the phone earlier. At first, I didn't think twice about it, but the compass needle was spinning, not drifting or flickering like when the magnetometer goes bad. Spinning. Smooth, continuous, maybe one full rotation every second. I tried tilting the phone, closing the app, reopening it. It kept doing the same thing. I'd had that phone for years. It had never done that. I opened the regular map app to see if the GPS was back. The blue location dot jumped around the screen like it was glitching. Half a mile north, then off the road entirely, then back near where I actually was, but still pulsing, like it couldn't settle. The compass needle spun faster. I felt a tightening in my chest that I tried to brush off as the kind of random anxiety that hits when you're out alone at night in a place that's just quiet enough to feel wrong. Set the phone down and stepped out of the car, partly to see if getting away from the metal frame would calm the magnetometer. The spinning didn't stop. The lot felt bigger once I was standing in it. The dark swallow of the abandoned building behind me felt like it was leaning in. But the sky looked clear, no storms, no clouds, just an empty, moonless stretch of stars. For some reason, the silence felt heavier than it had minutes earlier. I held the phone out in front of me, turning in slow circles to see if the compass responded to my movement. It didn't. The needle just kept looping, steady as a clock hand. That was when the light appeared. A faint flash, white, thin, fast, cut across the sky above me in a perfectly straight line, not like a shooting star. Meteor trails arc or taper or leave slight burns. This was a clean path, like someone dragged a laser pointer across black paper. It lasted less than half a second. My first thought was satellite, but satellites don't streak, they drift. And this wasn't drifting. It was traveling too fast and too sharply. I turned toward the direction it had come from, squinting. The sky looked normal again. If anything, too normal. Then the compass needle stopped, just froze, pointing southeast. Right after that, my car headlights flickered. One short blink, so quick I almost convinced myself I imagined it. The dome light inside the car glowed faintly, even though the door was shut and the engine off. It faded after a second, like a dying battery. But the battery was fine. I'd just had it replaced that summer. I tried unlocking the car with the fob. It didn't respond the first time. The second press worked, but the beep sounded softer than usual, as if something in the background had dampened the sound. I got back in and shut the door. The air inside felt warmer than outside, though I'd turned everything off. I checked the time. 10:43 p.m. I'd only been outside for a minute or two. The compass needle started spinning again. Slower this time, but steady. I held my phone up against the windshield and noticed the spinning seemed to sync weirdly with the faint hum I'd assumed was the highway earlier. Except now the hum didn't sound distant. It sounded close, too close for comfort, like it was reverberating off the roof of the car. I turned the engine on, and my dashboard lights glowed a dull orange before brightening to their normal level. The radio, which always turned on automatically, stayed silent. Just the screen lit up with no station. When I hit the power button, the speakers made a soft popping sound, then went dead again. I didn't want to sit there anymore. I backed up slowly, half expecting the engine to stall or the lights to flicker. Neither happened. As I angled toward the exit, I glanced up at the sky again. Another flash streaked overhead. This one was dimmer but slower, slow enough that I realized it wasn't moving the way an object should. Instead of traveling in a curve or dispersing, the streak held a perfectly even thickness and brightness from one end to the other. It looked artificial, but not in a way I could describe, just clean, like geometry. The compass needle jerked wildly, then froze, pointing straight up before spinning again. I pressed harder on the gas. As I rolled toward the back exit, my headlights washed over the weeds and cracked pavement in those stark white beams that made everything look flat. For a moment, the asphalt seemed to ripple, like heat rising off a road in summer. But the night air was cold, and when I looked again, the pavement was normal. My phone buzzed. A notification I couldn't fully read flashed on the screen, something about calibration failing, before disappearing. Then the compass closed itself. The home screen appeared. The signal bars returned. Everything seemed to snap back to normal. The humming stopped. The radio clicked back to life with static. The dashboard lights brightened just slightly, like they'd been dimmed without my noticing. I didn't slow down when I reached the road. I didn't look back at them all. I just got onto Route 6 and drove until the empty fields turned into houses and street lights and the hum of normal noise returned. But several minutes later, while passing a dark stretch of farmland north of town, my headlights caught something reflective above the road. Quick, small, like a flash of metal or glass. I glanced up just in time to see another faint streak travel across the sky. Slower this time, almost deliberate. My compass app popped open again on its own. The needle pointed straight at it. Then everything went still. The streak faded into nothing, leaving only stars that suddenly looked too ordinary, like they were pretending not to have moved. The compass fixed itself the second the streak disappeared. I didn't open it again for the rest of the night. And even now, months later, sometimes my phone buzzes randomly in quiet places, parking lots, empty roads, wide fields, and the compass needle twitches for no reason I can explain. It always points southeast first, then straight up, then normal again, like nothing happened. I was somewhere between Wausian and Napoleon when the radio went dead. 1 second, it was some late-night call-in show out of Toledo, the host talking over a guy from Bowling Green about gas prices, and the next, it was just gone. No static, no fade-out. Just a flat, empty silence that didn't even sound like the normal quiet between stations. I glanced down at the display. The station number was still there, the volume bar still halfway up. I nudged the knob anyway. Nothing changed. Great, I muttered, more to fill the space than anything else. It was close to midnight. Late July. Northern Ohio. The kind of humid summer night where the air feels thick even with the windows up and the AC on low. I was on County Road 13, the back way to my parents' place, because I'd left my buddy Nate's house too late and wanted to avoid the highway patrol. The world outside the headlights was just corn and soybeans and the occasional dark shape of a barn. No towns for a few miles, no gas stations, no other cars either. The last pair of headlights I'd seen had been 10 minutes earlier, coming the opposite direction. I tapped the radio off and back on. Still nothing, not even static when I spun the dial. Instead, a faint tone began. It came in underneath the dead silence like somebody had slid a tiny tuning fork inside the speakers. One soft, pure note. Not high enough to be painful, not low enough to feel like a vibration. Just a thin, clean tone that pulsed in a slow rhythm. On, off, off. I checked the display again. No station name, just FM 97.3 frozen there. When I twisted the knob to change it, the numbers moved, but the tones stayed. Same volume, same pattern, completely unaffected. The hair on the back of my neck stirred. I told myself it was some weird capacitor issue or a loose wire screwing with the audio. I'd bought the car used. The stereo already had quirks. Still, the timing of it felt strange. The tone pulsed at almost exactly the same tempo as my heartbeat. I tested it, held my fingers to my wrist, counting silently. 1 pulse, 2, 3. The tone lined up for several beats, then drifted slightly, then lined up again. Not perfect, but close enough that I noticed. I turned the radio off entirely. The tone kept going. That's when my stomach finally flipped. The display went completely black, as if it had lost power, and the rest of the dash dimmed for half a second before returning to normal. Check engine lights stayed off, RPM steady, temperature fine. Everything looked normal except for the dark radio screen and that thin, rhythmic tone still coming from the speakers. I cracked the window to see if the sound was actually in my head. Warm, damp air pushed in, carrying the smell of manure and cut grass. Crickets droned faintly in the distance. No tone. When I rolled the window back up, I heard it again. Clear as before. On, off. I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter and focused on the road. The cornfields on either side loomed high, taller than the car, blocking out any view of farmhouses beyond them. Every so often, I'd pass a break in the rows where a dirt lane cut through. Each time, my headlights would briefly wash over a mailbox or a metal gate before the corn walls closed in again. A few minutes went by like that. Just the hum of the engine and that soft, unnatural beeping in my ears. Then the tone changed. It doubled in speed, still soft, but the pulses now closer together. My chest tightened. It felt like someone had turned a dial inside my head. At the exact same moment, the fields opened up. I came to a long stretch where the land dipped away from the road into a broad, flat expanse planted with soy. The plants were low enough that I could see all the way across the field to the tree line and the old power lines that marched along the horizon like sharp black stitches. And there, ahead and slightly to the right, hovering over the field, was a dull red light. I saw it first as a smudge above the soybeans, like the end of a cigarette held in the dark. Then, as I got closer and the angle changed, it sharpened into a solid shape. Not perfectly round, not a point like a star, but more like the fuzzy circle you see when you stare at an LED through frosted glass. It hung maybe 20 or 30 feet above the ground, motionless. No blinking, no strobing, no beam, just a steady, muted red that didn't spill onto anything below it. I eased off the gas without realizing it. My speed dropped from 55 to 40, then to 35. The car felt too fast no matter what I did. My focus tunneled onto that light. The tone in the speakers shifted again, lowering in pitch slightly, still rhythmic, still detached from anything I did. I reached for my phone in the cup holder. The screen refused to turn on. The haptic buzz came through under my thumb, but the display stayed black, like the backlight had died. No glow, no icons, nothing. I held the power button. Nothing changed. "Come on," I whispered. The red light grew larger in the windshield as I approached. It stayed the same color, the same intensity. Dirt lanes branched off on both sides, empty and dark. No parked trucks, no yard lights, no signs of a farmhouse connected to that field. When I drew nearly parallel with the light, I realized how wrong it was. There was no reflection. The soybeans underneath it were just dark shapes in the wash of my headlights. The light didn't touch them at all. It didn't touch the road either. It was as if the air around it was the only thing allowed to participate. My instincts started screaming at me, but my body lagged behind, caught between wanting to slow down and wanting to floor it. I ended up settling somewhere in the middle, creeping past at maybe 20 miles an hour, eyes locked on the side window now. The red light remained exactly where it was, perfectly still, hovering over the field about 50 yards out. The tone in the speakers grew more insistent, not louder, just more present, like it was pressing against the inside of my ears. On, off, on, off, on, off. I could hear my own breathing now over the sound of the tires on asphalt. It sounded too loud in the small car. For 1 second, everything lined up, the car moving slowly forward, the empty road, the shadowy field, and that unnatural flat red glow hanging in the middle of it all. Then it shot upward, no ramp up, no acceleration, just instantaneous motion like someone had cut a frame out of reality. One moment it was there over the field, the next it was a streak zipping straight into the sky. A vertical smear of red, thin and impossibly fast, disappearing into the low clouds without ever bending or curving. The clouds themselves lit faintly from within, where the streak vanished. The glow spread out in a soft circle, then shrank back to normal gray. The tone cut out mid-pulse. Silence slammed into the car. Real silence, with only the engine and the faint hiss of tires left. My ears rang with the absence of that sound. I realized my foot had lifted fully off the gas. The car was coasting. I forced myself to look away from the rearview mirror where I'd been expecting to still see some trace of red. There was nothing. Just the empty road behind and the dark smear of field. I pressed the accelerator and watched the speedometer climb. 30, 40, 50. Off to my right, the brittle silhouettes of corn stalks rose again as the fields changed back from soy to tall crops. The tunnel closed in around me. For a few miles, I didn't dare glance at the sky. Eventually, curiosity or stupidity won out. I flicked my eyes upward through the windshield. The clouds looked ordinary. No glowing shapes. No strange holes. No streaks. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. I grabbed it so fast, I almost dropped it. The screen lit up normally, full brightness, icons all where they should be. A flood of delayed notifications came in. Group chat, email, a weather alert about possible fog after midnight. I opened the compass app without really knowing why. The little arrow spun twice, then settled. North was north again. I turned the radio back on. It came to life at normal volume, the call-in host droning about city council drama like nothing had happened. I spun the dial. Every station I hit was exactly where it should be, with normal static between them. I kept going until I reached the highway. When I pulled into my parents' driveway half an hour later, the porch light was on and the house looked exactly as it had for the past 20 years. My mom's ceramic rooster still sat lopsided on the front step. The maple tree still leaned slightly over the garage. Nothing felt any different out there. The sky was just sky. Inside, my dad was half asleep in his recliner with some late-night news show murmuring in the background. He glanced at the clock and asked if the drive had been okay. I heard myself say, "Yeah, fine," like I'd rehearsed it. It wasn't until I was alone in the guest room that I checked the time on my phone again. 12:07 a.m. The dashboard clock in my car had said 11:58 when I pulled into the driveway. I know because I looked, surprised I made it before midnight. 9 minutes difference. My car clock had always been dead on. I checked it compulsively against my phone on longer drives. Maybe it had just drifted. Maybe I'd misread it. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant sound of a passing train. Every time headlights swept the guest room curtains, my heart lurched, waiting to see a dull red instead of the normal white and yellow. Nothing strange happened the rest of the night. But a few weeks later, driving home along a different stretch of county road at dusk, the radio flickered. Just once. Just enough for one soft, familiar tone to slip through between songs. A single pulse, so faint I could almost pretend I'd imagined it. Then everything went back to normal, and the sky above the fields stayed empty. My smartwatch vibrated for the third time before I even made it to the end of my street. At first, I assumed it was just some glitch. Maybe I'd forgotten to clear a notification, or the haptics were acting up again. It had done weird things before after getting splashed during a run, so didn't think much of it. But when I lifted my wrist, the screen was blank. No messages, no reminders, no health alerts, just the time glowing at me like nothing was wrong. I shook my wrist a little and kept walking. The vibrations stopped for about 10 seconds. Then it buzzed again. 2 short taps against my skin, the exact pattern it used for incoming texts. I sighed and muttered to myself, "Come on, don't die on me now," and raised my wrist again. Still nothing on the display. It was just after 9 p.m. on a Tuesday, dry, cool, early fall. I was walking back from my friend Andrea's place a few blocks over. She'd asked me to help her move a bookshelf down a flight of stairs, which turned into helping her rearrange half her living room. I was tired, and I just wanted to get home, microwave leftover pasta, and zone out in front of a show. My neighborhood was quiet, suburban, but older. Large maple trees, uneven sidewalks, houses set back behind hedges and low fences. A few porch lights were on, but most places were dark. The sky was clear, except for a thin scatter of clouds drifting toward the horizon. Good visibility. The kind of night when you could see every star that wasn't drowned out by street lamps. My watch buzzed again. Harder this time. Longer vibration, like an alarm. I stopped under a corner streetlight and swiped the screen. Nothing. I held down the button to check for system errors. Still nothing. The watch was acting like it was perfectly normal, but also like it was desperately trying to get my attention. That was the first moment I felt uneasy. The second happened a few seconds later when I noticed the speck of light above the street. I don't know how long it had been there before I noticed it. It wasn't bright, not like a plane or a drone or even a satellite, just a faint, dim point, no bigger than a star. But it was low, much too low to be anything astronomical. My first thought was that it was the tip of a radio tower, but there were no towers anywhere near that part of town, and it was sitting perfectly still above the intersection ahead of me, not blinking, not moving, just hanging there. My watch buzzed twice. I looked from the watch to the light, from the light back to the watch. My heartbeat picked up in this uncomfortable, crawling way. I couldn't shake the feeling the two things were connected. Not in any logical sense, but in the way you just know something's wrong before you have proof. I took a few slow steps forward. The light didn't shift. It didn't flicker. It didn't react at all. But my watch buzzed again. 3 sharp pulses. Not any pattern I recognized. I turned in a slow circle, checking for headlights, security lights, electrical transformers, anything that might be throwing some kind of reflection. There was nothing unusual. Just empty street, evenly spaced lamps, silent houses. No movement except the slight rustling of leaves overhead. I thought about calling Andrea, but I felt silly. What would I even say? Hey, my watch is spazzing out and there's a dot in the sky? No way. Instead, I kept walking. Every few seconds, my watch vibrated. Some pulses were short, some long, some felt almost hesitant. It reminded me of someone tapping their finger on a desk while deciding whether to speak. When I reached the intersection, the speck of light hung right above the four-way stop. Maybe 100 feet up, maybe less. It wasn't bright enough to illuminate anything below it. The pavement looked exactly as it always did, smooth patches, cracked patches, a faded crosswalk symbol. Nothing unusual. But the light looked close. Closer than any star had a right to be. My watch buzzed so hard it startled me. I flinched and almost dropped my arm. This time, when I checked the screen, it was glowing white. Just a blank white screen, no icons, no numbers, no backlight bleed, perfectly uniform. I tapped it, swiped, held the button, nothing changed. And the light above me dimmed. Not all at once, more like a slow fade as if someone was turning a knob. I stepped back instinctively, expecting it to blink out or drop lower or reveal some shape around it. Instead, it hovered there, barely visible, then brightened again, back to its original faint glow. My throat tightened. I realized I'd been holding my breath. I forced myself to look away from the light and check around the intersection again. No cars, no people, not even a stray cat or cyclist. Just a quiet residential street and that point of dim illumination hanging above it. My watch buzzed in one long, continuous vibration. I lifted it toward my face and the buzzing stopped instantly. The screen stayed white. Then very slowly it faded back to the regular time display. 9:14 p.m. Like nothing had happened. I didn't move for a long moment. Just listened. Waited. My watch stayed quiet. I forced myself to walk. Not fast, but steady. One foot after the other. I kept my peripheral vision locked on the light, trying not to look directly at it, but needing to know if it moved. It stayed overhead. I rounded the corner onto my street. The light drifted slightly, not downward, not sideways exactly, more like it repositioned itself to stay aligned with me. The movement was so smooth I almost doubted I saw it, like a trick of my eyes. My watch buzzed once. Short, sharp. I broke into a faster walk. Halfway down my block, the light finally moved. It rose, straight upward. Not fast, just steadily climbing through the air. The higher it got, the dimmer it looked, until it was impossible to tell whether it had disappeared or simply blended in with the stars. By the time I reached my driveway, it was gone. My watch didn't vibrate again for the rest of the night. Inside my house, I sat on the couch with the watch off my wrist, set on the coffee table like it might do something if I looked away. It didn't. It stayed on, functioning normally. I restarted it twice, no glitches, no phantom notifications. Later, when I lay in bed, I replayed the walk over and over, trying to rationalize the whole thing. Maybe it really was a drone, one with a very weak light and a completely silent motor, or a satellite caught at a strange angle, or some atmospheric trick, and the buzzing was a coincidence or an electrical issue. Those explanations should have made me feel better. They didn't, because sometimes when I'm halfway to work or the grocery store or Andrea's house, the watch gives one single, unprompted buzz. Just one. And every instinct I have makes me check the sky. I first noticed the tone about 15 minutes outside of Redwater, on the stretch of highway that cuts between the dry creek beds and the old ranch fences. It was around 9:30 p.m., early summer, still warm enough that my windshield had a film of dust stuck to it. I had the windows cracked because the AC in my Subaru liked to quit whenever I drove uphill for too long. I'd been listening to a local classic rock station, but the signal always died once you passed mile marker 122. It should have faded into static. It always did. Instead, the song cut off mid-chorus and the radio switched to a steady tone. Not a harsh emergency alert kind, more like a long, even hum. Flat. No changes in pitch. It didn't waver the way static does. I smacked the side of the radio like an idiot. Nothing changed. I twisted the dial, same tone on every number, even the ones that never picked up anything but fuzz. I checked my phone, thinking maybe it was interfering somehow, but the phone was on airplane mode. The service out there was useless anyway. The tone kept going. Low, even, constant. I kept driving, trying to ignore it. The highway was almost empty, no headlights in either direction. The moon hadn't risen yet, so everything had that faint, grainy darkness where you can see shapes but no details. My headlights kept catching tufts of dry grass and the silver lines of barbed wire fences. Then I saw the glow. It showed up in the corner of my windshield first, like a faint dome of light somewhere above and behind me. It wasn't bright enough to cast shadows inside the car. It was more like when you're driving under a full moon and get that pale wash across the tops of things. I checked my mirrors, expecting to see a car cresting a hill behind me with its high beams angled weird. But there was nothing. The road behind me was pitch black. The glow didn't blink. It didn't sway. It just stayed with me, faint but steady. I tried telling myself it was the reflection of my own dash lights, but when I covered them with my hand, the glow stayed right where it was. After a few seconds, I realized the radio tone was syncing with something. Every now and then, the hum dipped for half a heartbeat, not breaking, just softening, and the glow seemed to brighten at the exact same moments. It wasn't perfect, but close enough to notice. I kept my speed at around 50, hands tight on the wheel. For a while, nothing changed, just the endless hum, the empty road, and that pale glow above me. Then the glow shifted. Not fast, not like something swooping. It just slid slightly to the left, like whatever was making it had changed position. And when it moved, the tone in the radio pulsed, a short, almost undetectable flutter. I slowed down, maybe 5 miles an hour. The glow slowed with me. It stayed the same distance behind and above, like it was tethered to the car. I sped up again. 70. The glow kept pace. Didn't drift, didn't fade, just followed. The tone in the radio didn't get louder or softer. It was locked in that same steady hum, like it wasn't coming from the speakers at all, but from somewhere deeper in the car. I rolled the windows up and turned the radio off entirely. The hum continued, even with the radio shut off. That's the part that made my mouth go dry. Around mile marker 128, the highway curved through a shallow dip between two rock cuts. The glow dimmed a little as I drove under the rock walls, like something above me couldn't follow directly overhead for a moment. When I came out on the other side, it brightened again. That was the moment I realized, whatever it wasn't a reflection. I pressed my foot down harder than I meant to. The Subaru wasn't fast, but it groaned its way up to 75. The glow didn't blink. Up ahead, the town of Redwater finally showed itself. First, the faint orange halo over the grain silos, then a handful of scattered porch lights along the outskirts. Farther ahead, I knew the first streetlight sat just past the gas station that always closed too early. I kept checking the mirrors. The glow was still there, maybe a little brighter now. I didn't want to stop the car. The idea of pulling over on that lonely stretch made my stomach twist. I just wanted to reach town. The radio hum fluttered again. This time it had a rhythm to it. Short dip, long dip, then back to steady. Almost like a pattern. I passed the big rusted billboard that welcomed you to historic Redwater, Est 1904. The first streetlight came into view, buzzing faintly. As soon as the yellowish light from that lamp spilled across the hood of my car, the glow behind me dimmed sharply. I checked the mirror. It was still there, but weaker, flickering a little. The hum in the radio grew thinner, like someone slowly lowering the volume on a speaker. I crossed into town limits and rolled past the old gas station. The glow flickered again, harder this time, like a bulb struggling to stay lit. By the time I reached the first four-way stop, the glow snapped off entirely, gone between one blink and the next. The radio hum cut out at the same moment, leaving the car dead quiet. My ears rang in the sudden silence. The Subaru's engine sounded too loud, too normal. I sat there at the stop sign longer than I needed to, hands still clenched around the wheel. A couple of night shift workers were outside the diner across the street, smoking and talking. One of them waved at me as I passed. Everything in town looked the same as always. Normal. Grounded. I drove to my apartment at the edge of town, parked, and sat in the car with my headlights off for a minute. The sky above Redwater looked empty. No glow. No sound. Just stars. Eventually, I went inside. The rooms felt unusually still, like the house was holding its breath. I walked through every space, kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, flipping lights on and off just to hear something familiar. Later, lying in bed, I kept replaying the drive in my head. The steady tone, the way the glow matched my speed, the way it died the moment I hit town light. Around midnight, I got up and looked out the window toward the highway. It was dark, just the occasional pair of headlights cutting across the distance. I didn't see any glow. Nothing followed anyone else down the road. But when I pressed the button on my alarm clock to turn on the little radio, it had. The speakers popped softly like they were adjusting to something, then played static for half a second before settling into the regular morning station. I set the clock back down and didn't turn the radio on again. The next day, everything worked normally. The Subaru's radio flipped between stations without any trouble. The AC even held up on the drive to work, but sometimes, when I'm heading home after dark and the sky is clear, I catch myself checking the mirrors for any hint of pale light drifting just above the roofline, waiting for that steady tone that shouldn't have been possible to start humming again. I heard the chirping on a Thursday night, sometime after 9 p.m., while I was sitting on the back patio with a beer. It had been a long day, and the temperature had finally dropped enough that the air felt reasonable again. One of those warm Colorado summer nights where the breeze is barely there, just enough to move the wind chimes now and then. I usually sat outside for a bit before bed to decompress. That night felt normal at first. The sound came while I was halfway through my drink, soft, rhythmic, and too regular to be an insect. It wasn't a bird either. Birds don't chirp like that at night, and they definitely don't chirp in perfect pulses. It was faint, almost shy, but still distinct enough that I heard it over the hum of the swamp cooler through the screen door. Chirp, 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 about 1 per second. Clean, mechanical almost. I tilted my head a little, listening harder. It seemed to be coming from above, not from the yard, not the roof, higher than that. When I looked up, the sound stopped immediately, like someone hit pause. The sky was clear, typical dry summer night. Stars everywhere, the Milky Way a faint smear overhead. Nothing moved, no planes, no satellites, no clouds, just black sky and cold pinpoints of light. I waited a few seconds, still staring upward. Nothing. When I finally looked back down at my beer, the chirping returned, same rhythm. Same pitch, almost exactly where it had been before. I looked up again. It stopped. I tested it a few times, trying not to freak myself out. Look down, chirp. Look up, silence. Look down, chirp. Up, silence. It was too consistent to be a coincidence. Eventually, I kept my head angled downward, but shifted my eyes upward without moving too much. The chirping faltered, not a full stop, but a stutter, like it was reacting to my attention, even if I wasn't fully looking at it. When I lifted my chin by even an inch, the sound cut off. That was when my skin prickled. Not fear at first, just confusion that made me suddenly aware of how alone I was outside. I stood up slowly, trying not to crunch the gravel too loudly. I walked out into the middle of the yard where the patio light didn't reach as well. My eyes adjusted to the dark. The chirping didn't return yet. I waited. 5 seconds. 10. Then chirp, chirp, chirp. I didn't look up this time. I kept my eyes level with the fence. The sound seemed to be coming from maybe 40 or 50 feet above me. Too high for a bug on the roof, too low for a plane, too steady for anything I could explain. It wasn't echoing off the houses. It didn't sound like something far away. It was overhead, directly. I took another step into the grass. The pulsing got slightly louder. Not by much, but enough that I could tell I'd moved closer to it. I finally whispered, "What is that?" Because hearing my own voice grounded me a little. The sound stopped again. Not faded. Stopped. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears then. The neighborhood around me was dead quiet. No dogs barking, no cars on the main road a block over, not even crickets. It was so still that it felt like the entire world was holding its breath. I backed up until I felt the patio concrete under my feet again. When I reached my chair, I sat down, gripping the armrests. Chirp. I jumped slightly at how sudden it was. Chirp, chirp. I stared straight ahead, letting my eyes relax, letting my peripheral vision widen. Sometimes you can catch movement that way better than looking straight at something. For a second, just a second, I thought I saw something darker than the sky shift above me. Not a shape, more like a patch where the stars didn't match up, like one or two of them were slightly displaced. I blinked hard. The patch was gone. The chirping continued. I tried to see if the sound had a direction. I rotated my head a little. It stayed above. I crouched down. It stayed above. I leaned back in my chair and stared at my knees. Louder. I exhaled shakily and put the beer on the ground. My hands were trembling now, and I didn't want to spill it. I forced myself to stand again and walk to the far end of the yard, near the fence. The chirping stayed with me. Not directly overhead every step, but shifting just slightly to stay aligned above me. Like it was tracking me, not from a distance, but from a fixed height, straight up. At one point, the chirping paused, and the silence got so deep it almost rang in my ears. Then a softer, lower pulse joined it, like a second voice humming from above, slower and stretched out. I looked up without thinking. Silence again. I couldn't see anything. My eyes darted from cluster to cluster of stars, searching for any sign, motion, shape, anything. Nothing. I backed away from the fence and started walking toward the house. I didn't run, but I didn't stroll either. The chirping picked up again when my gaze dropped. Shorter intervals now. Chirp, 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 chirp. It reminded me of sonar pings. When I reached the porch, I hesitated. The porch light created a cone of brightness that felt suddenly unsafe, like stepping into it would make me visible in a way I didn't want to be. But the dark yard felt worse. I stepped into the light anyway. The chirping slowed. I placed my hand on the doorknob. The chirping stopped. I waited. After 5 long seconds, a single chirp sounded. Loudest yet. Not painfully loud, but sharp. Intentional. I turned the knob quickly and slipped inside, shutting the door behind me. I locked it without thinking and stood in the entryway with the lights off, listening. Nothing. Not even the refrigerator hum. I cracked the blinds just a sliver and peeked outside. The yard looked normal again. Streetlight down the block flickered faintly like always. Nothing overhead. No movement. I watched for 2 full minutes, hardly breathing. Still nothing. When I finally flicked on a lamp, the normal house sounds returned. The fridge humming, the swamp cooler rumbling, the faint chirp of a smoke detector battery dying somewhere down the street. I sat on the couch and stayed there until almost midnight, too keyed up to move, staring at the back door as though it might open on its own. Eventually, exhaustion won. When I went to bed, I left the blinds closed and the lamp on low. Just before I drifted off, I heard one faint chirp from outside. Not overhead, off to the right, east of the house. Distant, almost shy. Like whatever it was had drifted away but hadn't gone far. I didn't get up. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, imagining the sky above the neighborhood and life, wondering if something was passing over the houses the same way it had passed over mine. Pausing each time someone looked up, pulsing softly in the dark, continuing only when no one was paying direct attention. For days afterward, every time I sat outside, I caught myself listening hard for that pulsing sound. Some nights I heard normal noises, wind, insects, cars on the road. Other nights, the silence got thick again, too evenly quiet, and I'd go back inside after a few minutes, so the heart picking up speed. I haven't heard the chirping again the way I did that first night. Not clearly, not close, but every once in a while, right as I'm looking away from the stars, I think I hear the beginning of it, just one pulse. Before the night swallows it, like something paused again mid-motion, waiting for me to look up so it could disappear. I woke up because something in the house felt wrong. Not loud, nothing crashing or banging, just off. It took me a second to figure out what it was. The air in my living room was vibrating. Not shaking exactly, but kind of shivering, like there were huge engines running miles away and the rumble was finding its way into the walls. I lay there listening, not sure if I was dreaming or if it was one of those half-awake sensations where your body gets confused. But the vibration didn't fade. It wasn't physical enough to rattle anything, no frames, no shelves, but I felt it in my chest, in my teeth, in that weird low part of my throat, like when you stand too close to a bass speaker. My apartment isn't big, 1 bedroom, living room, kitchenette, all on the 2nd floor of a small building. So when something feels off in one room, you feel it everywhere. The vibration didn't seem to come from any direction, it just existed in the air. I glanced at my phone. 2:47 a.m. The vibration got a tiny bit stronger, just enough that I sat up in bed. My first instinct was some kind of machinery outside, maybe road work or a generator turning on somewhere, but I didn't hear anything through the walls. No trucks, no engines, nothing. I tossed the blanket off and swung my legs over the side of the bed. As soon as my feet touched the carpet, I felt the vibration through the floor too. Not shaking, not moving, just a steady low pulse. I stepped into the hallway. It felt stronger there, like walking into a warm draft, except it wasn't warm. The air felt thicker, harder to breathe, like the pressure shifted slightly. Halfway to the living room, the vibration stopped. Not faded, stopped. Abruptly, like somebody flipped a switch, I froze where I was, one hand on the wall. My ears rang in the sudden silence. The air felt empty in a way that made the hair on my arms lift. For a few seconds, I didn't move, just stood there listening. Nothing. When I reached the living room, everything was normal. The couch, the lamp, the glass of water I'd left on the coffee table. But something about the room felt unsettled, like I'd walked in right after someone else had walked out. I walked over to the big window facing the parking lot and pulled the blinds up a few inches. The lot was empty except for a few cars. A street lamp flickered once and then stayed steady. There was no wind, no insects, no distant hum of the highway, just silence. I checked the time on the microwave clock, 2:52. My phone had said 2:47 only a moment earlier. I stared at those glowing green numbers for way too long. 5 minutes disappearing isn't a lot, but the jump felt wrong, especially because I didn't remember the walk to the living room taking more than 30 seconds. I pulled my phone back out. The lock screen still said 2:52. No notifications, no glitches, no alarms that might have confused me. I toggled the screen off and back on, still 2:52. I didn't know what to do with myself, so I grabbed a hoodie from the back of the chair and walked into the kitchen. The floor felt normal, no vibration, no pressure. I drank water from the glass on the counter and just stood there with both hands wrapped around it. A moment later, something tapped. Not the door, not the window. Somewhere in the apartment, a soft, quick tap like someone lightly flicking the wall with their finger. I turned toward the hallway. Nothing moved, nothing shifted. I held my breath and waited. Another tap, a little lower this time, maybe closer to the floor. I crouched down, pressing my palm to the carpet. No vibration, no sound. Just the tap, like someone testing different parts of the wall. My first thought was pipes. Old building, weird plumbing, maybe someone downstairs turned something on. But the taps weren't rhythmic. They didn't match each other in timing or direction. They felt inquisitive, if that makes sense. Like something checking the boundaries of the space. After a few seconds, they stopped too. Just stopped. I stood up slowly. The living room looked normal, but the air felt alert, like the room was holding its breath with me. I went back to the window and pushed the blinds a little higher. The parking lot looked the same, but the street lamp at the far end flickered again. 3 slow flickers, then steady. Something about the pattern felt intentional. I backed away from the window. Not panicking, but not comfortable either. My brain kept trying to make a rational list of explanations. Power surge, electrical noise, construction somewhere, faulty wiring. But none of those would make the air vibrate like that. And none of them explained the 5-minute jump. I sat on the couch, hoodie zipped tight, even though the room wasn't cold. Luna, the dog I sometimes walk for my neighbor, scratched on the wall next door. It startled me so badly I almost jumped off the couch. I forced myself to breathe normally. I checked my phone again. 2:57. Time was moving normally now. I turned the TV on low just to get some sound in the room. I didn't even watch it. I just wanted the noise. Every few minutes I'd get up and look out the window again. Around 3:20, something flickered in the corner of my vision. I jerked my head up. It wasn't the street lamp this time. The clouds above the building briefly lit up, soft, dim, like someone shining a flashlight through thick fog. The glow lasted maybe half a second, not bright enough to light the ground, just a faint bloom in one section of the sky. Then it was gone. The vibration didn't return, but the silence afterward felt the same. That expectant quiet, like the night was waiting for something. I stayed on the couch until sunrise, watching the sky go from black to gray to pink. Nothing else happened. No more taps, no strange lights, no missed time. I eventually lay back down around 7 and slept for a couple hours. When I checked the clocks later, everything lined up. My phone, the microwave, the oven. None of them had changed. Just that one 5-minute jump in the middle of the night. I didn't tell anyone at first. What do you even say? Hey, my apartment felt like it was humming, the sky flashed, and time decided to skip ahead like a bad video? It didn't sound real even in my own head. But in the days afterward, little things kept nudging at my memory. The sound, or lack of sound, right after the vibration stopped, the pressure in the air, the exact moment my phone's time jumped, down to the second, and the way the sky glowed that faint, impossible color. I still take the blinds down at night sometimes, just to see if the street lamp flickers again. It hasn't, not once. But about a week later, lying in bed, I felt a tiny tremor in the air. So small, I would have missed it if I wasn't waiting for it. I sat up immediately, checked the clock. This time, nothing changed, but the room stayed quiet for a long, long time. I was sitting in the backyard with my friend Ryan, just killing time after dinner. It was one of those warm, dry summer nights in eastern Colorado where everything feels quiet but not empty. The sky was clear enough that you could see the Milky Way without trying, and we were just leaning back in a couple of old lawn chairs my landlord left behind. We weren't doing anything special, just talking about work, the usual stuff. At one point, Ryan stopped mid-sentence and squinted upward. "Hey," he said, lifting his chin, "that star's weird." I followed his gesture. At first, I didn't even know which one he meant. There were a lot of stars, and I wasn't exactly an expert, but he kept pointing until I found it, a bright white dot a little above the tree line to the west. "What's weird about it?" I asked. "It keeps blinking?" "No, not blinking, something else." I stared at it. It didn't look like much at first. But the longer I watched, the more I noticed it wasn't twinkling like a normal star. The brightness was changing, but not randomly. It was rising and lowering in an actual pattern. Soft, bright, dim, soft, bright, dim, steady, like a slow heartbeat. I opened my mouth to say something when Ryan said, "It's doing that on purpose, right?" I almost laughed, but I didn't. Something about the rhythm made my skin tighten a little. Stars didn't pulse like that. At least not stars I'd ever seen. We watched it for another 30 seconds or so. It didn't move, didn't drift, just pulsed. Then it stopped entirely. It held steady like any other star. "Well," Ryan said, exhaling. "Okay then." We both tried to shrug it off, but the mood shifted. The yard felt too still, the air too warm. I kept glancing back up at that star, even though I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. But once you notice something off, you can't unsee it. After a few minutes, Ryan checked his phone. "I should head out," he said. He lived a few blocks down the street and usually walked when he came over. I told him I'd walk part of the way with him because I wasn't tired yet. We left my yard and started down the sidewalk. Houses were dark, most people already in bed. The streetlights weren't bright, more of a dim amber glow, and they didn't fill the gaps between the poles. It made the spaces between them feel darker than usual. I noticed the star again when we reached the corner. It had started pulsing again. "Dude, look," I said. Ryan groaned but turned around anyway. "Seriously?" We watched it for maybe 20 seconds. Pulse, dim, pulse, dim. "Let's keep walking," he muttered. "I don't like it." We kept going, but I could tell he was watching the ground on purpose, just so he wouldn't have to look up again. A few houses down, the cicadas suddenly cut out. Not slowly, just gone all at once, like someone hit mute on the whole street. Ryan stopped walking. "Did you hear?" "Yeah." He looked at me, uncertain. I didn't say anything because I didn't trust my voice not to shake a little. The silence felt thick. I could hear my own heartbeat, which I usually never notice. Then the streetlight above us flickered once. Not out, just a momentary dip. We looked at each other again. "Maybe a transformer?" I said, though it sounded weak. Before he could reply, a shape crossed overhead. I didn't see the whole thing, just a brief, dark silhouette gliding across the sky, blocking part of the stars as it went. No noise, no wind. Nothing to tell how big or close it was, just a smooth shadow passing above the neighborhood. Ryan swore under his breath. We both looked up at the pulsing star again, but it wasn't pulsing anymore. It was gone. Not dimmed, not faded. Gone. We stood there for maybe a minute, not moving. The cicadas started again, but it didn't help. Their sound felt thin, like background noise in a video instead of something alive. "I'm going home," Ryan said quietly. "I'll text you." I watched him leave, but I didn't head back to my house right away. I don't know why. Something felt unfinished, like if I moved too soon, I'd miss whatever came next. A breeze picked up, hot, dry, not cooling at all. When it brushed past me, I felt a faint pressure against my ears, almost like a plane passing overhead, except the air stayed completely still after. No sound followed, no plane. I looked up at where the star had been, nothing but regular sky. But as I started walking back toward my house, I noticed something else. My shadow. Under the nearby streetlight, it looked normal at first. Then, as I stepped forward, it lengthened unnaturally far behind me, longer than the streetlight should have cast. and the streetlight wasn't flickering. I stopped walking. My shadow didn't. For half a second, maybe less, it lagged like the ground beneath me was catching up. Then it snapped back into place. I actually gasped. It felt like the bottom dropped out of my stomach. Everything seemed to return to normal after that. My shadow looked fine. The streetlight glowed steadily. But every step back to my driveway felt like wading through a bad dream where your legs don't quite work right. When I got inside, I locked the door without thinking. I checked the windows. I checked the backyard again through the glass. The sky looked totally ordinary. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I went to brush my teeth, and when I walked back into the living room, I noticed a faint light on the ceiling. A soft circular reflection, like someone standing outside was shining a weak flashlight upward through the window. I pulled the blinds open fast, but nothing was there. Just my yard, my fence, the neighbor's shed. The reflection on the ceiling faded immediately. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept picturing that steady, unnatural pulse in the sky, the rhythm of it, the way it looked intentional. The next morning, Ryan texted me saying he didn't want to talk about it, which was weird because he's usually the type to send 20 messages about anything weird that happens. As the day went on, I checked the sky a few more times without really meaning to. The stars looked normal that night, completely normal. No pulses, no shapes, no shadows acting wrong. But sometimes when I'm outside and letting my eyes adjust, I feel myself staring at the same patch of sky where that star had been, half expecting it to blink back on. Not twinkling, just waiting. My flashlight caught a sharp flash off something metallic about 30 yards ahead, right in the middle of the field. It was too clean and bright to be dew or glass or the moon hitting something random. It looked solid, like the side of a car or polished steel. I stopped walking and stood there, listening. The night was quiet, the kind where even crickets sounded distant. A thin layer of clouds covered most of the sky, so there wasn't much moonlight. I clicked the flashlight again, aiming toward the exact spot. Nothing, just tall grass bending slightly in the breeze. My name's Daniel Rivas. I'd been cutting across the old Kilmer field on my way home from my cousin's place. It was a shortcut I'd taken 100 times, even at night. The farmer who owned it didn't care as long as nobody messed with the crops. It was late summer, hot all day, but the air had cooled off just enough to feel damp and heavy. I walked forward slowly, keeping the flashlight steady. My shoes brushed through the grass, leaving a narrow trail. The spot where the reflection had been looked completely normal now. No metal, no disturbance, not even flattened grass. I stood there and swept the beam in a wide arc. Still nothing. I told myself it had to be something dumb. A beer can. A broken reflector. Maybe my eyes just caught a weird angle of moisture. Even with that thought, I felt off. The air felt thicker than it should have, like my skin knew something before my brain did. I checked my phone, no notifications, no weird time changes. It said 10:47 p.m. I kept walking. A minute later, the reflection happened again. This time, closer, maybe 20 feet ahead. It was brief but clear, that same smooth metallic gleam. I stopped again, my heart starting to beat harder than it should have. "Hey," I called out, half expecting some drunk neighbor or teen to answer back. Nothing responded, no movement, no wind picking up. Just that quiet stretch of rural land with the faint outline of the tree line in the distance. I walked forward, slower this time, my flashlight shaking just slightly. Every step felt heavier, like the ground was softer than usual, even though it wasn't. When I reached the spot, the grass was untouched again. No object, no mark, no sign anyone had been there. Not even a footprint. Behind me, the field was darker than before. The ambient glow from the town lights felt dimmer, like the darkness had grown closer without me noticing. Then I heard it, a low hum. Not loud, not sharp, just a soft vibration that sounded like it was coming from everywhere. It wasn't mechanical exactly, more like a pressure in my ears. I turned slowly in a circle. The sound didn't change. My flashlight flickered once, then steadied. A few steps further, the hum deepened just a little. Enough that I noticed it even through my breathing. I aimed the light toward the tree line again and saw movement. Not fast, not slow, just a subtle shift in shadow that didn't belong. It wasn't a person, it wasn't an animal. It was like a shape that didn't fully catch the beam, as if the light wasn't sure how to touch it. I squinted, trying to force focus. It didn't feel threatening exactly, just wrong. The hum grew quieter. Then the metallic reflection hit again, this time off to my right. I turned fast, heart jolting. Empty grass, no object. My breathing sounded too loud in my own ears. I felt exposed, like the field had suddenly opened wider than it ever had. I checked my phone again. 11:06 p.m. It hadn't felt like that much time passed. The humidity pressed against my skin. Sweat trickled down my side, even though I wasn't moving much now. And then something shifted overhead. Not a bird. Not wind. Just the faintest movement in the clouds, where they bulged slightly downward and held there for a second longer than they normally would. A dull glow pulsed behind them. Not bright, just enough to notice. The hum stopped. The glow drifted sideways, smooth and steady, then thinned until it disappeared completely. All at once, the normal sounds of night returned. Crickets, distant traffic, a dog barking somewhere closer to the road. The air felt lighter again, like a door had been cracked open and closed without me seeing it. I stood there another minute, trying to convince myself I hadn't seen anything meaningful, trying to replay it logically. Metal reflection, weird lighting, fatigue, overactive imagination. I started walking again, faster now, not quite running, but close. The field no longer felt like a shortcut, it felt like dead space. Halfway across, the hum returned for just a second, softer than before. Enough that the short hairs on my arms lifted, then silence. The path near the road came back into view, gravel crunching under my shoes as I stepped out of the grass. Streetlights flared slightly in the distance, normal and reassuring. I looked back once. The field looked the same as it always had, flat, uneventful, just grass and shadow. No shimmer, no glow, no shape. I walked the rest of the way home without stopping. Inside, I locked the door and leaned against it, trying to slow my breathing. The house creaked the way it always did. The fridge hummed. My phone still showed 11:06 p.m. I stared at the screen longer than I needed to. Outside, through the window, the sky settled back into its usual quiet. No glow, no movement. But every time I closed my eyes, I could still see that flash of smooth metal sitting in an empty field that never showed what it belonged to. The notification popped up on my phone at 2:17 a.m., a single line from my security app that said, "Motion detected, backyard." I only checked it because I was already half awake, staring at the ceiling and listening to the pipes tick in the walls. I sat up and opened the live feed. The screen showed the usual view of my yard. Patchy grass, the old maple tree by the fence, and the corner of the shed where the paint had started peeling. Everything looked still. No raccoons, no stray cats, no person creeping around, just the faint glow from the neighbor's porch light bleeding in from the side. Then I scrubbed back a few seconds to see what triggered it. There was a soft flash. Not a bright burst, not like a camera strobe. More like the yard briefly filled with pale light, as if something had reflected off metal and bounced through the space. It lasted maybe half a second. The tree and fence glowed and then went normal again. No source, no reflection point, just sudden light and darkness. I noticed the timestamp jump from 2:16:22 to 2:17:22. Exactly 1 minute missing. I frowned at my screen, thumb hovering over the playback bar. The app had glitched before, but never like that. Usually it just stuttered or froze for a second. I rewound it again, slower this time. Same thing, normal night, then the faint flash, then the time skipping ahead. I pushed the covers back and slipped out of bed, trying not to wake my dog, Miko, curled at the foot. My apartment was cold enough that the tile made my feet tense up when I stepped into the hallway. The backyard door was locked. I checked it anyway, then I flicked on the porch light and peered through the glass. Nothing looked different. The grass was still wet from the earlier mist. The air outside hung heavy and cool, and the neighbor's wind chimes clinked weakly in the distance. I slid the door open a few inches. The night air rolled in, damp and quiet. No smell of smoke, no odd chemical scent, just the faint earthy smell of wet soil. I stepped out onto the concrete slab and stood there, listening. No insects, no distant traffic. Even the usual hum from the power lines near the road felt quieter than normal. I checked the yard with my phone's flashlight, sweeping it slowly across the fence line, the base of the tree, the side of the shed. The beam caught on nothing unusual. No flattened grass, no marks, no objects I didn't recognize. Still, that light bothered me. I went back inside and sat on the couch, staring at the camera feed again. It had returned to normal, timestamp advancing steadily. The yard looked boring and calm, like it had always been. Around 2:40, I noticed something else. The wind chime stopped completely. Not slowed, just stopped. The leaves on the tree didn't twitch. The faint breeze I'd felt earlier was gone. The camera view showed the yard frozen like a still photo. Then the screen flickered, not fully. Just a thin horizontal band of distortion slid across the image and vanished. I leaned closer, eyes narrowing. "Come on," I muttered. Miko lifted her head and let out a low, uncertain huff. That wasn't normal for her. She stayed quiet unless someone knocked. I glanced toward the back door again, listening. There was a faint sound outside. Not footsteps. Not quite. More like a soft shifting, almost like fabric brushing over grass, slow and steady. I held my breath and watched the screen. Nothing moved. No shadows crossed the yard. No figure passed through frame. Then the faint glow returned. This time it wasn't a flash. It hung for a second, illuminating a patch of grass near the fence about 5 feet in diameter. It didn't cast hard shadows, just a dull, pale wash of light that felt slightly out of place. The timestamp flickered again, 2:41 to 2:42:3. Another missing minute. My stomach tightened. I grabbed a hoodie and slipped my shoes on, even though every part of me said I shouldn't go back out there. I unlocked the door and stepped onto the porch again. The air felt thicker now. Not humid exactly, just heavier, like it pushed back slightly when I moved forward. I stood on the edge of the concrete, staring into the yard. The patch where the light had appeared looked normal again. The grass stood upright, glistening faintly. No scorch, no impression, no sign it had been lit up at all. But the quiet was wrong. Even when nothing happened, there was usually background noise. Crickets, traffic, air moving. This felt like being inside a paused moment. I took a slow step off the porch. The grass gave a soft crunch under my shoe, and the sound seemed louder than it should have been. I moved another step closer to the fence and waited. A low hum pulsed through the air, not loud, barely there, like a distant engine miles away, except it didn't rise or fall. It just existed, steady and flat. I glanced upward. The sky was cloudy, low sheets of gray drifting lazily over a barely visible moon. No aircraft lights, no stars. The hum faded, and the air went dead still again. I backed up toward the porch, unease settling deeper in my bones. Inside, I checked the camera once more. The feed had stabilized. No glow, no flicker, just the yard as it always looked. I didn't sleep much after that. Every tiny sound made me shift my eyes toward the back door. Miko refused to leave my side. By morning, the sky had turned pale and hazy, the kind of gray that made everything feel muted. I stepped outside with a mug of coffee and looked around for anything out of place. The yard looked entirely ordinary. No marks, no dents, no broken plants, not even disturbed dirt. I pulled up the recording again on my phone as I stood there. The flashes and skipped minutes remained. Everything in between showed the yard waiting, empty and unbothered. Around 9:30, I noticed the maple tree casting an odd shadow line across the lawn, perfectly straight, sharper than the others. It slowly softened as the sun shifted, then disappeared. I told myself it was just the angle of light. Still, I left the camera app open all day. Nothing else happened. No alerts, no strange flashes. By evening, I almost convinced myself the whole thing had been a system glitch mixed with poor sleep. But when I checked the yard one last time before bed, I noticed the grass near the fence swayed slightly, even though the rest of the yard remained still. No wind, no sound. Just that small patch moving slowly, like something had passed through it moments before. I watched it for a long time until it stilled again. The camera stayed silent through the night after that. No more flashes, no skipped time. But every time I glanced at the dark window, I had the uneasy sense that something had already figured out how my yard looked from above and was deciding when to come back. A low humming tone pulsed quietly through the open window beside my bed, soft enough that, at first, I thought it was the refrigerator downstairs or the old heater rattling awake. I'd left the window cracked because the air inside the cabin felt stale, even though the night outside was cool and damp. The sound didn't fade or change like normal background noise. It stayed steady, like a slow heartbeat, from somewhere beyond the trees. I pushed myself up and glanced toward the shoreline. The ocean was barely visible, just a flat, dark stretch under a cloudy sky. The stars above looked off. Not brighter or dimmer, just slightly misaligned, like the pattern had been nudged out of place. I stared for a few seconds, expecting my eyes to adjust. They didn't. My name was Jonah Mercer, and I'd been staying at this rented coastal cabin for 2 nights, trying to clear my head after a long stretch of work. The place was quiet, isolated, and exactly what I needed, until that sound started moving through the air. I checked my phone. 1:42 a.m., no notifications, no missed calls. The hum deepened, not louder, just more present, like it filled the air rather than traveling through it. I swung my legs out of bed and padded across the wooden floor, bare feet brushing past cold knots in the planks. The sound felt closer by the time I reached the window. Outside, the trees along the edge of the property held perfectly still. No wind, no rustle. Even the waves seemed muted. I leaned forward and scanned the sky again. The stars didn't twinkle the way they usually did. A few of them looked slightly closer together, forming crooked lines that didn't match any constellation I recognized. It wasn't dramatic or obvious, just enough to not feel right. The humming shifted slightly, like it pulsed in waves. Slow, patient. I stepped outside onto the porch, the wood cool under my feet. The night air felt heavier than before, thick with salt and damp earth. I walked across the gravel path toward the edge of the clearing, eyes never leaving the sky. A faint glow started to bleed through the clouds, right above the tree line. It wasn't sharp or blinding, just a soft, pale light like moonlight diffused through fog, except the moon was nowhere in sight. The hum synced with it, each faint vibrational pulse matching the glow's slow rhythm. I stood there, arms hanging uselessly at my sides, trying to convince myself it was just some weird reflection off the water or distant boat lights. But it didn't move like boats. It didn't flicker. It stayed locked in place. Then slowly the glow slid sideways, perfectly smooth. No sound, no trail, just a calm, deliberate drift. The stars above it shifted further out of alignment, like the sky itself adjusted around that one spot. A sharp unease crept into my chest. Not panic, just a heavy awareness that something wasn't behaving the way it should. The hum grew slightly stronger, enough that I felt it faintly through the soles of my feet. The ground didn't shake, just a mild vibration, like standing near a distant engine. I pulled my phone out again and raised it toward the light, half instinct, half confusion. The screen dimmed abruptly, and the signal dropped to 0. No bars, no data, just a blank carrier field. The glow pulsed once, faint but noticeable. The air felt colder suddenly, even though I hadn't moved. I stepped back without thinking, heels scraping against gravel. The hum didn't follow me. It stayed anchored to wherever that light hovered, as if it had claimed that space. Another minute passed, maybe several. Time felt stretched, loose. The glow shifted again, this time rising slightly above the trees, then freezing in place. The stars around it distorted subtly, lines bending in ways I couldn't quite focus on long enough to understand. I whispered something under my breath, more out of nerves than intention. The sound felt swallowed by the night. Behind me, the cabin door creaked faintly, as it caught a tiny movement in air I didn't feel. I turned my head briefly just to check the house, then looked back up. The glow had dimmed, shrinking slightly, but the hum intensified for a few seconds, vibrating through my jaw and ears. It wasn't painful, just intrusive. The sky cleared around it for a moment, and I could make out something darker within the glow. A smooth shape, no sharp edges, like a shadow against light that refused to resolve into anything familiar. The thought crossed my mind that I should go inside, lock the door, pretend I didn't see anything. I didn't move. The glow drifted again, higher this time, slowly approaching the thin clouds above. The hum began to thin, as if pulling away from the ground. The stars reconfigured slightly, snapping back closer to how they should have looked, but not quite perfect. I took a few cautious steps backward toward the porch. The glow suddenly steadied, holding still for several long seconds. Then, without sound or flare, it faded. Not abruptly. Just slowly draining out of the sky until there was nothing but dark and uneven star patterns. The hum lingered for a moment longer, faint and hollow, before dissolving into the quiet night. Silence returned in pieces. Distant wave crash, A bird settling somewhere in the trees, the faint flutter of leaves. I stood out there a few minutes longer, heart beating too fast for how still everything felt. When I finally went back inside and shut the door, the air didn't feel heavy anymore, just normal again. Dim. Uneventful. I checked my phone. Signal bars returned. The time read 2:01 a.m. I stared at the clock, realizing I could have sworn it had only been a few minutes since I'd looked last. The room felt colder than before. I climbed back into bed, but couldn't fully relax. Every small sound made me tense. Every faint creak in the wood drew my attention toward the window again. The stars outside looked ordinary now, this familiar. But every so often, in the space just behind my thoughts, I kept sensing that quiet hum, like a memory echo. And I couldn't shake the feeling that the sky had briefly shifted and then carefully put itself back the way it found me. The radio faded from an old country station into soft static without me touching anything. I glanced down at the dial, thinking maybe I'd bumped it, but both my hands were still on the steering wheel. Outside the windshield, a dull glow hovered at the very end of the gravel road, about where the tree lines started. It wasn't bright, just enough to notice against the dark. I was parked up on the overlook outside Marine Falls, the one people used when they didn't feel like hiking all the way down to the water. It was late, probably close to 10, and the air had that damp, salty feel that came off the ocean. A thin layer of fog hung low over everything, but the sky above was clear enough to see a few stars. My friend Caleb had canceled on a late-night drive, so I'd gone alone just to clear my head. The glow didn't move yet. It just floated there, steady and quiet, like it had always been part of the road. I turned the engine off to see if the radio would reset, and the static kept going for another 2 seconds before cutting out completely. The sudden quiet felt heavy. I rolled my window down a crack and waited to hear the usual night sounds. Bugs, distant traffic, the ocean far off, but everything sounded muted, like someone had lowered the volume on the world. The light pulsed once, faintly. Not flickering, more like a slow inhale and exhale. I told myself it was probably someone's headlights angled weird through the fog. That stretch of road got almost no traffic, but it wasn't impossible. I leaned forward to see if I could spot any shape behind the glow, but there was nothing. Just woods and that single dim point. Then my phone buzzed and scared the hell out of me. It was a text from my neighbor Gina asking if I'd picked up my mail again. I looked at my signal and noticed it had dropped to 1 bar, which was strange for this spot. Usually it was full out here. I typed back that I'd grab it tomorrow, hit send, and watched the message hang there for a solid 10 seconds before finally going through. When I looked back up, the glow had shifted slightly to the right, not rising or falling, just sliding sideways, like it was following the line of the road. I eased my foot back onto the brake and turned the key to start the car. The engine hesitated before finally kicking over. The dashboard lights came on dimmer than usual. I waited another minute, just staring, trying to convince myself I was overthinking it. The glow slid a little more and then stopped again. A soft hum started, barely audible. Not from the car. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. The kind of sound you'd feel more than hear, like a vibration pressing gently against your ears. I checked my mirrors. No cars, no people, no movement. Just me and that light. I pulled forward slowly, tires crunching on the gravel. The glow stayed the same distance away, like it was tied to my car with an invisible string. 10 feet forward, it moved 10 feet too. I stopped. It stopped. My pulse picked up, and the air inside the car felt suddenly too warm. I rolled the window further down and called out, half joking, half nervous. "Hello?" My voice sounded small. It didn't echo. The forest line at the end of the road looked darker than it should have, as if the light wasn't really touching anything around it. The hum thickened for a moment, then dropped just as quickly, leaving my ears ringing softly. My headlights flicked once, like someone tapped the switch, but my hands never moved. I felt that cold, creeping feeling in the pit of my stomach, the one you get when you realize a situation is shifting out of normal territory. I decided I didn't need to be brave. I reversed carefully, eyes locked on that glow. As the car rolled back, the light drifted with me, still keeping its distance. The fog around it started to thin, but the glow didn't get brighter. It stayed dull and smooth, almost flat. Another strange thing happened. My clock on the dashboard changed from 10:14 to 10:16 in a blink, skipping a minute. I hadn't even been out there long enough to notice time passing. The radio snapped back on for a second. A low burst of static followed by a faint voice that didn't sound like music or a DJ. Just a clipped mumble, too distorted to make out. Then silence again. I backed all the way until I was nearly at the main road. The glow finally stopped moving and hovered where the gravel met the trees. It stayed there, motionless, like it had finished whatever it was doing. I put the car in park and sat there breathing slowly, trying to calm the trembling in my hands. The hum had softened but never fully faded. I watched for another minute, then another. The glow dimmed just a little, then suddenly slid upward and vanished into the fog without any trailing light or sound. The night felt wrong after that. Too quiet, too empty. I waited a few more moments before pulling out onto the main road. As I drove home, the radio behaved normally, playing some late-night talk show, but I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, expecting to see that dim light floating behind me again. The rest of the drive passed in a haze. Streetlights flickered as I came back into town, and I noticed a few porch lights turning on and off randomly, but I didn't know if that meant anything or if my brain was just trying to connect dots. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat there for a long time before getting out. The air felt heavy again, like before a storm, but the sky was still clear. Inside, everything looked normal. My dog barely lifted his head when I walked in, which was strange on its own. Later, lying in bed, I replayed the whole thing over and over. The static, the way the light kept pace, the skipped minute. I checked my phone again before sleeping. My sent text to Gina showed the timestamp as 10:15 p.m., even though I swore I sent it closer to when I first pulled up. I never saw the glow again. But sometimes when I drive past that overlook now, my radio softens for just a second, like it's about to slip back into static, and I feel that same tight pressure in the air, like something is paying attention just beyond the edge of view. The signal dropped without any warning. 1 second my phone showed full bars, the next it read no service. I was standing at the edge of the public overlook near Blue Ridge Cutoff, a spot where the hills dipped low enough to see all the way across the valley. It was late afternoon, the kind of overcast day that never quite committed to rain, just heavy gray clouds hanging low and dull. A chill crept through the air even though it was still technically spring, and the breeze smelled faintly like damp soil and pine. My name's Julian Mercado, and I'd pulled over there just to stretch my legs after a long drive from work. No big reason. The road behind me stayed quiet, and down below the trees and brush swayed gently in the wind. I frowned at my screen and gave it a tap, thinking it was just lagging. Still nothing. I waited a few seconds, then switched airplane mode on and off. No change. The phone felt warm in my palm for no reason even though I hadn't been using it much at all. Great, I muttered. Normally, even in that area, I still had at least one bar, but now it stayed blank. I stepped closer to the railing, looking out across the hills while waiting for the signal to return. The clouds pressed low, almost flat in their stillness. The air felt oddly quiet, like the background noise of the world had been turned down just a little. I glanced left and right. No one else stood at the overlook. No cars pulled in. No distant chatter carried on the wind. A faint pressure hung in the air, not strong, just enough to make me aware of it. I checked my phone again. Still dead. I sighed and slid it into my pocket, deciding I'd just give it a minute. Sometimes the service came back on its own. Another minute passed. No change. I could still hear the whisper of wind through the tall grass and the faint creak of the metal railing as it shifted under my weight, but something about the overall quiet felt wrong in a way I couldn't put my finger on. Then the sky flickered. Not lightning, not a clear flash. More like someone turned up the brightness for half a second, a pale wash of light spreading across the low clouds before settling back into gray. It was subtle enough that I could have talked myself out of seeing it if it hadn't made my eyes widen instantly. "What was that?" I whispered. I tilted my head back, scanning the cloud cover for any sign of break or movement. The overcast remained thick and uniform, no shape or source for that brief light. My phone vibrated slightly in my pocket. I pulled it out quickly. Signal bars reappeared. full again, like nothing had ever happened. Before I could even react, the sky flickered again, a wider pulse this time, more visible. The clouds brightened faintly, bathing the overlook in a pale, cold glow that lasted just a second longer than before, then vanished. Still no sound, no thunder, no crackle, no rumble, just light and then nothing. My mouth felt dry. I stepped away from the railing, heart tapping harder than made sense for something so quiet. I checked my phone screen instinctively. Everything worked. Messages loaded, notifications appeared that had been delayed just a few minutes before. It was like time itself had paused for a beat and then snapped back into place. The air felt thicker now, as if the light had left a faint residue behind it. I glanced toward the tree line below, half expecting something solid to be moving out there now that the sky had reacted. Nothing stood out, just hills folding into shadow and slow drifting greenery. A third flicker spread across the clouds, softer, more drawn out. It didn't illuminate the ground. It didn't cast shadows. It just shifted the tone of the sky for a moment, then disappeared again. My chest tightened. I didn't know what I was waiting for, but the idea hit me suddenly that I didn't want to be standing in open space if something else decided to happen next. I tucked my phone into my jacket and turned slowly toward my car. As I walked, the feeling of being watched crept in bit by bit. Not a sudden realization. Just that subtle sense that something beyond my normal sight had become aware of my presence. I forced myself not to look back immediately. Then I did anyway. The overlook stayed empty, the railing cold and worn, the sky dull and heavy, no extra light now. I reached my car and opened the door, glancing up one more time before getting inside. The clouds remained motionless. The dull gray horizon didn't shift. I slid into the driver's seat and shut the door, sealing myself into something familiar and contained. The faint hum of the engine starting felt more comforting than I expected. Still, I didn't drive off right away. Another flicker brushed the sky, even fainter this time, like the pale memory of the last two pulses. And then, silence settled back in. I put the car in reverse. Halfway through pulling back, my phone buzzed against my thigh. A text from my friend Naomi. "You back yet? Signal cut out when I tried calling." I stared at the message longer than necessary. "Just stopped a second," I typed. "Weird service out here." No more flickers followed as I eased onto the road. The drive home stayed quiet, the world outwardly normal again. Trees blurred past, the road stretched in its usual winding line. The faint vibration of tires against pavement grounded me with every mile. Still, every time the clouds seemed to brighten just slightly from passing sunlight or reflective glare, my spine stiffened. By the time I reached town, the sky had cleared enough that bits of pale blue peeked through the upper layers. Life continued around me like nothing had happened. But the subtle break in the sky lingered in my thoughts, lodged there without explanation. When I finally parked outside my apartment and stepped out, the phone worked normally again. Bars full, notifications lining up as if nothing had interrupted them at all. I glanced upward one more time without really thinking about it. The sky remained its usual muted gray, drifting slowly, no sign of that pale flash anywhere. Still, the memory of that quiet flicker stayed with me. The way it arrived and vanished with no warning, like a moment shared between me and something that never needed to explain itself. The first thing I noticed was how still the clouds looked. I'd been walking the old access trail behind Pine Knot Ridge, the one that ran along the tree line before dropping down toward the quarry pond. It was late, close to 10, and the air held that damp chill that settles in after a light rain. Mist hung low over the ground, and the sky was thick with dark clouds that barely moved. I only went out there to clear my head after a long shift. Nothing exciting, that just the familiar sound of gravel under my boots and wet pine needles cracking softly. My name's Riley Marquez, and I'd lived in this town long enough to trust what normal looked like out here. That night didn't feel normal, but I couldn't explain why at first. I was halfway down the bend where the trail opens up just enough to see the sky when I instinctively looked up. Right above the clouds, or maybe just under them, there was a shape. Not a bird, not a plane, not anything with clear edges, just a darker section against the already dark clouds, like a shadow that didn't belong to anything. It was too still to be drifting, too solid to be smoke. It sat there, suspended, refusing to shift even as the rest of the sky moved faintly around it. I slowed and then stopped, my breath shallow without meaning to. It didn't have lights. No blinking, no sound drifted down from it. The woods around me stayed quiet except for the faint hum of insects and the damp smell of forest floor. My phone buzzed in my pocket and I ignored it, eyes locked on the shape. It looked flat, but not shallow, like it was projecting depth without enough contrast to truly define it, almost like a void pressed into the sky. I stepped forward once, cautiously, gravel crunching underfoot. The shape didn't react. It just stayed. A slow unease crept up the back of my neck. Not panic, not shock. Just the sense that something was out of place, and I wasn't meant to have noticed it. The air felt heavier. Even the mist below thinned, like the space around it held a different texture. "Okay," I whispered, more to break the silence than anything else. The shape remained. I watched for a good 30 seconds, maybe longer, time stretching strangely thin. Not a single movement came from it. No wobble, no drift, nothing aerodynamic about it. Then, almost subtly, the edges began to soften. The darkness loosened, as if the shape was thinning into the surrounding clouds instead of moving away. Not dissolving fast, just gradually losing definition. The contrast between it and the sky reduced, softening the corners until it looked more like uneven fog. My heartbeat quickened in a delayed sort of way. The shape didn't float off, it didn't shoot away, it simply faded into the night, blending back into the same dull cloud cover like it had never been there. And then it was gone. I stayed standing in the same spot, staring at the stretch of sky where it had been, waiting for anything else to happen. Nothing did. The wind rustled treetops faintly. Leaves shifted on the ground. The trail looked the same it always had. But a hollow quiet hung over everything for an extra moment, as if the forest itself had held its breath too. I swallowed and checked my phone, finally. A missed call from my coworker Isa asking about tomorrow's schedule. Normal. Grounding. I slipped the phone back away and forced my legs to move again, though my pace stayed slower than before. Every few steps I looked back up, half expecting the shape to return or shift somewhere else. It didn't. The trail opened a bit more down the slope, and the mist thickened again, climbing up around my knees. My own footsteps sounded louder in my ears than they should have. Another strange moment came when the ambient noise of the woods dropped too low. No wind, no insects, just silence. It pressed against my ears, reminding me of how isolated I was out there. I paused again and listened. The quiet lasted maybe 10 seconds. Then, like a switch flipping, the night returned to normal. I exhaled slowly, realizing I had been holding my breath without noticing. Nothing else appeared in the sky. Still, the idea of there being something capable of sitting that still, that quietly, unsettled me more than if it had darted away. I turned back toward the trailhead, not ready to go deeper into the trees. As I walked, a flashlight beam flicked through the darkness ahead. "Riley?" A familiar voice called. "Yeah," I answered quickly. It was Devin, who lived a few houses down from mine. He'd probably been doing his usual late loop with his dog. "You good?" he asked, squinting past me at the tree line. "Yeah," I said. "Just saw something weird in the sky." He followed my gaze upward. "Like what?" "Dark shape. Didn't move. Then kind of just went away." He frowned. "Plane? It didn't look like one. Probably the clouds," he shrugged. "They mess with depth real bad at night." "Yeah, probably." But even as I said it, I knew the explanation didn't quite fit. He wished me a good night and continued past, dog trotting beside him, past tail wagging like the world was fully normal. I watched till his flashlight disappeared down the trail before heading back myself. The rest of the walk passed without incident. No more strange shadows, no silence drops, no odd movements above the treetops. When I reached the parking area and got into my car, the interior felt strangely safe in contrast. The hum of the engine grounding, the dashboard lights familiar. I glanced up through the windshield one last time before pulling out. Clouds. Just clouds. No void. No shape. The drive back home took 10 minutes, streets nearly empty, wet pavement reflecting dull orange streetlights. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I felt mostly like myself again, even if that strange knot of confusion still lingered under the surface. Inside, my cat Luna meowed lazily from the couch and stretched, completely unconcerned by anything I'd just seen. I kicked off my boots and sat there for a moment, listening to the soft ticking of the wall clock. Everything was normal, almost too normal. I glanced toward the window again as if it might offer something else, but the sky looked calm and familiar now. Still, when I finally crawled into bed, the memory of that impossible stillness stayed with me. That quiet, dark silhouette pressed against the night, dissolving as if it had never needed to justify its presence in the first place. The air felt thicker the second I stepped onto the trail. It wasn't subtle either. I'd walked this same path behind Miller's Ridge 100 times before. It was my regular spot to clear my head after work. Packed dirt, scattered pine needles, a few loose rocks, nothing complicated. I could have walked it blindfolded. That afternoon, though, something felt off the moment my boots hit the first bend. The sky had that dull, overcast look that usually meant rain later, but it hadn't started yet. Just heavy gray clouds sitting low and stubborn. The trees looked normal. The birds sounded normal. Still, the air around me felt wrong, like it had weight. I slowed my pace without really meaning to. Every step took more effort than usual, like walking through humidity that shouldn't have been there in mid-October. My name's Trevor Hargrove. I lived about 10 minutes from the trail in a quiet edge-of-town neighborhood where most people waved but didn't really talk. I'd grown used to the peace. So the silence pressing in that day stood out immediately. The wind had dropped completely. Not a leaf moved. I continued forward, telling myself I was imagining things, but my shoulders stayed tense. The usual sounds faded into this weird, muffled calm that felt like being underwater without the pressure. About 50 yards ahead, just past the narrow section where the trees grew closer together, I saw it, a faint shimmer hanging between two trunks. It wasn't bright. It wasn't even clearly defined. Just a wavering patch of air that looked slightly distorted, like heat rising off asphalt. Except there was no heat. I stopped dead. My heart thudded harder than it should have for something so quiet. The shimmer pulsed gently, almost breathing. Not light, not dark, just a disturbed look in the air that didn't match anything else around me. I swallowed and took a thin step closer. Every instinct told me not to. The pressure in the air intensified slightly as I moved forward. Like the silence itself thickened. My breath sounded loud in my ears. "Hello?" I said quietly, even though I had no idea why I was speaking. No response. The shimmer wavered again, its edges blurring and reforming. For a second, I thought I saw a shape behind it, but it never fully came into view. Just the suggestion of something slightly darker than the space around it. Then the birds stopped, all at once. No chirping, no rustle, nothing. The silence pressed so hard it almost rang. I froze, eyes locked on the distortion, and then it faded. Not snapped away, not vanished, just slowly thinned out like mist until the air looked normal again. The weight in the atmosphere lifted subtly, but not completely. I stood there, breathing shallow, waiting for anything else to happen. Nothing did. The forest sounds returned in scattered pieces. A few leaves shifted. Somewhere farther down the ridge, a squirrel rustled through brush. But the uneasy feeling didn't go away. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone watching me, but the trail remained completely empty. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I checked it without breaking eye contact with the path ahead. No signal. That never happened out there. The coverage was usually fine. I slid it back inside my jacket and forced myself to keep walking, slower now, deliberate. The rest of the trail felt subtly warped, like I'd stepped into a place that looked the same but didn't behave the same. Sounds came a half second late. My footsteps seemed quieter than normal. Even my breathing felt off. Another minute passed before I noticed it again, this time farther ahead through the trees. The shimmer had returned. Not in the same spot. It hovered slightly higher now, almost chest level, flickering faintly like air rippling in slow motion. It shifted barely side to side, as if adjusting its balance. I stopped again. The silence grew heavier. Behind the distortion, a vague shape seemed to lengthen and compress, but never clearly resolve. My stomach tightened. "What is this?" I whispered, more to myself than anything. The shimmer began to drift, gliding between branches without disturbing them, not bending twigs, not brushing leaves, just floating along the path like it knew where it was going. Towards me. My feet automatically stepped backward. The air cooled slightly as it approached, enough for my skin to prickle. The pressure in my ears deepened, a dull sensation like descending in an elevator. 5 feet away. 3. Then it stopped. The closest it ever got. I couldn't see through it properly, just endless vague motion, as if something existed just out of reach of clarity. A low hum pulsed once, soft enough that I wasn't sure if I heard it or felt it more through the ground. Then the shimmer collapsed inward and vanished. No fades, no afterglow, just gone. The sound of the forest rushed back in like a snapped cord. Wind returned, leaves moved. I stood there shaking, fully aware how alone I was. For a second I considered running, but my legs felt stiff and unsure. Instead, I turned around and headed back the way I'd come, not daring to look over my shoulder more than once. The hike back took longer than usual, though my watch told me barely 10 minutes passed. When the first houses came into view again, the air finally felt normal. Heavier tension stayed in my body long after I reached my porch. That night, laying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, replaying it all again without any clear sense of what I'd experienced. Sometime after midnight, my phone finally regained signal. 3 missed messages from my sister, none during the time I'd been walking. The next morning, I drove back to the trail, partly hoping to find something physical, some evidence that it hadn't all been in my head. The path looked the same as always. Dry leaves, packed dirt, quiet woods, no shimmering space, no quiet dead zone, just regular forest. I walked only a short distance that time before the pressure returned faintly at the base of my neck. I turned around not long after and headed home. Weeks passed. Nothing happened again. Still, even now, anytime I walk that trail, I notice the same stretch where the air felt wrong, and my pace automatically slows as if my body remembers something my mind still can't figure out. And sometimes, just for a split second, the space between the trees looks like it's breathing. The glow started low, barely noticeable at first, like someone flicked on a weak light behind the far end of the skyline. I was sitting on my tiny third-floor balcony in Tacoma, just killing time after a long shift. My name is Curtis Molina, and at that point the day had already felt stretched thin. It was late evening, warm but sticky, the kind of summer air that clung to your skin even after the sun dipped down. I leaned back in the cheap plastic chair and watched the glow creep upward from behind a blocky office building about 2 streets over. It moved slow and steady, not like headlights or a plane. It had no trail, no flicker, just a dull, even light, almost like fog lit from the inside. Then it stopped, right there, mid-air, hovering between the rooftops and the clouds. No sound, no movement. It just hung there for a second too long, and then it thinned out, like it evaporated and disappeared. I stayed frozen, beer halfway to my mouth, trying to figure out what I'd just seen. The sky went back to normal, a deep fading blue with the usual distant city glow near the horizon. I told myself it was probably just some weird reflection or construction lighting, but I didn't feel convinced. Over the next few nights, I kept finding excuses to sit out there. Same chair, same balcony rail, same view. Nothing weird happened at first. Just the normal sounds of traffic, someone's dog barking 2 buildings over, a couple arguing somewhere down the block. Then 3 nights later, the power briefly dimmed in my apartment. Not fully out, just low enough that the overhead light in the living room flickered and came back softer than before. My phone charger blinked once, then stayed on. I stepped outside and the glow came back. Same spot, same slow rise, same spot midair. This time it lingered for longer, maybe 5 or 6 seconds, then drifted slightly to the right before fading again. No sirens, no reaction from any neighbors, no voices, just quiet, like the whole section of air was holding its breath. The next day at work, I mentioned it casually to my coworker Janelle. Just a quick, "Hey, did you notice weird lights last night?" She shrugged and said she hadn't seen anything. I laughed it off and dropped it. But that night, a new sound started. Around 11:40 p.m., while I was scrolling through my phone, a low humming came from outside. Soft, steady, not mechanical like an AC unit or a fan. It felt closer, too, like it was right above me, but not loud enough to echo. I stepped out again. No glow. But the hum stayed for almost a minute before tapering off slowly, like something gliding away. I slept badly after that. Light sleep, broken dreams, the kind where you feel watched even when you're alone. 2 nights after that, I noticed a new detail. The glow returned, but this time it wasn't alone. faint shadows bent strangely around it, like the light was shaping the air instead of passing through it. It didn't cast normal reflections on windows or glass, just absorbed into the dark sky above. It rose, paused, then sank slightly like someone testing it, before sliding back down behind the same building where it first appeared. I walked out to the edge of the balcony and leaned forward, trying to see if anything moved on the rooftop below. Nothing. No people. No antennae. Nothing that could explain it. Another few nights passed. The glow came and went. Sometimes higher, sometimes barely peeking over the roofline. No pattern I could figure out. Then something off happened inside. I was sitting in the living room when I noticed my digital clock on this flash the wrong time. It said 2:17 a.m., but my phone read 1:59. A few moments later, the stove clock corrected itself without any buttons pressed. The air smelled faintly sharp, almost like burnt metal, but there was no smoke, no burning wires, nothing obvious. I walked into the bedroom and realized the curtains were moving even though the windows were shut. When I pulled them aside, the glow was already there, brighter than before, just hovering in that same suspended space. This time it didn't rise. It stayed exactly where it was, just steady and quiet, like it was waiting. And this time I felt it. The pressure in the air, a subtle heaviness pressing down on my ears and chest, like when an elevator slows too abruptly. A soft clicking noise echoed faintly, not from any one direction, more like an ambient pulse layered into the night. I stood there, heart beating way too fast, unsure if stepping back or staying still was the right move. It remained there another 10 seconds. Then it dimmed and vanished, like a light switched off miles away. The pressure vanished with it. No sound followed, no fading trail, just gone. That night I barely slept. When I checked outside early the next morning, the sky was normal. A few birds perched on the wires, people jogging past, life exactly how it was supposed to look. But my balcony railing felt cool in an odd way, colder than the air should have made it. The next evening, I noticed something else. My neighbor across the way, a guy named Marcus who mostly kept to himself, was standing on his own balcony longer than usual, staring in the same direction. When I stepped out, he glanced over and hesitated before asking, "You seen that light too?" I froze. "You mean over there?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, been happening for a bit, right?" I didn't know whether I felt relieved or more unsettled. We both stood there in silence for a long time, waiting, watching the empty sky above the buildings while the night deepened. And when the glow finally came again, faint and quiet and deliberate, we didn't say anything. We just watched it rise, pause midair, and dissolve. Neither of us tried to explain it. We both pretended it wasn't happening. And eventually we went back inside like nothing had changed. But the hum came back even after the glow disappeared. And I could still feel that faint pressure in the air, long after the night settled back into normal. I was out on Greer's Ferry Lake, just me and the boat, around 10 o'clock at night. Early September, still warm enough in Arkansas to fish comfortably after dark. The air had that heavy, damp feel to it, not stormy, just still. No wind, no bugs buzzing in my ears for once, and barely a ripple across the surface. I usually fish alone. I prefer it that way, quieter, less explaining to do if I want to sit and do nothing for an hour. My name's Dennis, been fishing this lake since I was a kid. My dad had a little John boat he used to take me out in, and now I've got a flat-bottom tracker with a trolling motor and a little depth finder. Nothing fancy, it's all I need. That night, I was set up on the south end, near a cove past the bluffs. No one really goes out that far after dark. There aren't any campsites nearby, and most of the serious night fishermen stay closer to the boat ramp. I liked the isolation. I anchored in maybe 15 feet of water, turned the overhead light off to avoid bugs, and just sat there with my line in the water and a cold Gatorade in hand. No music. No music. No phone. Just the quiet slap of water against the hull and the occasional hoot from an owl in the distance. I don't know how long I was sitting there. Could have been an hour, could have been 2. I wasn't catching anything. That didn't bother me. The point wasn't really the fish that night. At some point I started noticing the water under me looked off. Not visibly moving or bubbling or anything, but just slightly different. Like the color had shifted. I thought maybe clouds had moved across the moon and changed the way the light hit it. But when I looked up, I saw the sky was still mostly clear. Moon was bright, almost full, with just a few wisps of cloud hanging low, low to the west. I leaned forward, peering over the edge of the boat. That's when I saw it. A faint glow directly under me. Not a reflection, not the moon. It wasn't shimmering like light off the surface. It was beneath it. Maybe 4 or 5 feet down, like moonlight had somehow gotten trapped under the water. It wasn't flickering, and it didn't have a clear source. It was just there, glowing softly, pale blue, maybe a little silvery. I figured it had to be some kind of bioluminescence, maybe a patch of algae or something stirred up from the bottom. But it was too consistent, too defined. It wasn't drifting aimlessly. It was shaped not into something I could name, not a fish or object, but shaped like a soft oval, like a slow pulse of light. Then it started moving, not fast, not in a hurry, just sliding away from the boat, smooth and deliberate. It didn't leave a trail or ripple. The surface of the lake stayed perfectly calm. Even my bobber didn't twitch. But I could see it passing under the water, glowing gently, slipping off toward deeper water. I stood up, slowly, trying not to rock the boat. I watched it go. It moved maybe 15 feet, paused, and then kept going, fading as it went. Eventually it disappeared into the darker part of the lake where the moonlight didn't reach. The whole thing lasted maybe a minute, maybe 2. I didn't move for a while after that. I just stood there holding my fishing rod in one hand, the other resting on the edge of the boat. I kept looking at the water like it might come back. Eventually I sat down, reeled in the line, checked my phone out of habit even though I had no signal out there, no notifications, nothing new. That's when I noticed the depth finder had shut off. I thought maybe the battery died, but the trolling motor still worked, and they run off the same power supply. I switched it off and on again. Nothing. No lights, no beeping. Just dead. I decided that was enough fishing for the night. I pulled anchor and started the motor, keeping it slow as I made my way back toward the ramp. I stayed close to the shoreline, which I normally don't bother with, but I felt better being near something solid. On the way back, maybe 10 minutes into the ride, I glanced over my shoulder and saw what I thought was another boat's light back in the direction I'd come from. But it wasn't bobbing like a boat light should. It was hovering, just above the waterline. Pale, steady, and absolutely silent, I stopped the motor and cut the lights, let myself drift. It didn't move, just hung there, maybe a foot above the lake, maybe 2. Hard to tell from that distance. Could have been 20 yards away, could have been more, but it was there. Then it slowly dipped down, touched the surface, and vanished. Not into the water, into nothing. Like it had never been there. I waited. Nothing. I turned the motor back on and made it the rest of the way to the ramp without stopping. When I got the boat back on the trailer and started heading home, I turned on the radio to kill the silence. The display on the dash read 12:44 a.m. But the trip back hadn't taken that long. I double-checked my watch. It said 12:01. My phone said 12:01. The truck's clock was the only one that said otherwise. And then, just as I was pulling into my driveway, it reset to 12:01, right in front of me. Just blinked off and came back. I didn't sleep well that night. My mind kept replaying the moment that glow slid under my boat and how the water never moved. I didn't go back out to that cove for a while. And when I finally did, a couple weeks later, I brought my friend Tyler with me. Just in case. I didn't tell him why. I just said the fish were biting better down there. They weren't. But I didn't care. I wasn't really there for the fishing that time either. It was early November, maybe the second week, and I was driving from my sister's place in Millersburg back to where I live in Marietta. It's about an hour-and-a-half drive through mostly back roads and farmland. I left her house later than I meant to, closer to 11 p.m., and by the time I was out of town and into the unlit stretches, the fog had started to settle in. Not thick at first, but enough that I had to slow down. I've made that drive dozens of times, so I wasn't worried. I had music playing low and a big thermos of gas station coffee in the cup holder. My only real concern was deer, since they like to jump out on those back roads. But the farther I got into the hills, the heavier the fog got. Not just low to the ground, it started clinging to the trees, thick bands drifting across the road like smoke. Somewhere past a little town called Dresden, where the farms get sparse and the woods close in tight, My high beams stopped helping. They were just bouncing off the fog, so I dimmed them and crept along maybe 30 miles an hour, just trying to keep between the faded white lines. That's when I saw the headlights. At first I thought it was another car coming around a bend up ahead, maybe half a mile away. Two bright points of light, side by side, a little yellowish, except something was immediately off. They looked too high, like way too high, at least twice the height of any normal car or truck. They weren't blinding either, just suspended there, shining through the fog. I eased off the gas and watched them, expecting them to move, to get closer or shift as the other vehicle turned, but they just stayed in place. No motion, no glare, just fixed. I thought maybe it was a utility truck on a hillside or a combine or something, but the terrain there is pretty flat and mostly trees. And these lights were centered over the road, not off to the side. As I got closer, maybe a quarter mile out, the lights started to fade. Not flicker, just dim, like someone was slowly turning a dial. Within 5 or 6 seconds, they were completely gone. I reached the spot and there was nothing there. No car, no turnoff, no fence, no pole, just road and fog. I slowed to a crawl and stuck my head slightly out the window. The air was dead quiet. I even killed the radio for a minute. No engine hums, no night sounds, just silence and fog. I drove on. About 10 minutes later, I passed a barn I always use as a landmark. The roof's half collapsed and there's this old grain silo behind it. I remember looking at it, noticing how weirdly still everything was. Normally there's some motion, trees swaying, a raccoon darting across the ditch, something, but it all felt frozen. That's when my car made this hiccup. Not a full stall, but a quick dip in power. The dash lights dimmed and the engine sputtered like it had choked on air. Then it caught again and kept running. I tapped the gas, heart racing a little, and everything seemed fine. I looked in the rearview mirror. Way behind me, maybe a few hundred yards, those same two lights were back. But now they were low, road level, still spaced like headlights, but too far apart to be a car. And they weren't swaying or bouncing like a vehicle on a country road. They were dead steady, not getting closer, just holding their place in the distance. I don't know why, but it made my stomach flip. I kept driving, trying not to look back too much. Every time I did, the lights were still there. Same position, same distance. Not gaining, not falling back, just matching me. At some point, I hit a longer straightaway and decided to pull over. There's a gravel patch next to a field gate that I've used before. I figured I'd let whatever it was pass, see if it was some kind of farm vehicle with weird high beams. I pulled over and killed my lights, rolled the window down halfway. The lights behind me didn't move. They stayed where they were, hovering. Not even a hint of motion. I watched for maybe a full minute, not blinking much. Then they dimmed again, slowly, and vanished. I waited another couple minutes, engine still running. Nothing, just fog and dark. Eventually I pulled back onto the road and kept going, a little faster now. By the time I got to the bridge outside Lowell, the fog started lifting. It thinned enough that I could see the stars again, and I felt this weird pressure in my chest ease up, like I'd been holding tension without realizing it. When I got home, I parked in the driveway and sat for a second before getting out. The sky was totally clear. My phone had no notifications, even though I'd had it on vibrate the whole drive. Then I noticed my trip odometer. I always reset it before long drives. I know that road well enough to know it's about 86 miles from my sister's to my house. It reads 64.3. I went back through the route in my head, thinking maybe I'd turned somewhere or taken a shorter path. But I hadn't. There's really only one good way to get back. I even checked Google Maps afterward, same distance as always. Somewhere along the way, I lost over 20 miles. No time was missing. I wasn't late getting home, but the car recorded less distance traveled than it should have. I've never figured that out. The next morning, I checked the car for issues, loose battery cable, wiring problems, anything that might explain the dash flicker or the trip meter. Everything looked fine. I asked a mechanic friend about it a week later. He said if the power dipped just right, it could reset some things temporarily, but it usually wouldn't affect the odometer. It hasn't happened again. But I don't drive that road at night anymore. Not alone. I was sitting at the bus stop out on Old Quarry Road, the one with the crooked metal bench and the faded route sign that always looked like it was about to fall off. It was around 6:40 in the evening, late enough that the sky had gone that weird purple-blue color you only see in the countryside. I was heading back from my after-school job at the feed store, waiting for the last bus home before my mom started texting me nonstop. It was cold. Not freezing, but the kind of cold that made me tuck my hands into my sleeves. The road was empty in both directions, just fields on one side and woods on the other. No houses close by, no streetlights, just the one dim bulb inside the little shelter, flickering when the wind hit it. I didn't see the kids arrive. One second I was alone. The next there were two of them standing a few feet away. A boy and a girl, both young, maybe 10 or 11. Both pale in a way that looked wrong for kids who should have been running around or playing outside. Their clothes were plain. Dark jackets, dark pants, nothing bright or patterned. They weren't even breathing hard, like they hadn't walked there. They were just suddenly present. I sat up a little straighter. Hey, I said, trying not to sound weird. You guys waiting for the bus too? The girl stepped closer. Her movements were slow, like she wasn't used to having to move her body. Does this bus go toward the light? She asked. Her voice wasn't nervous, but it wasn't curious either. It was flat, like she was asking out of obligation. The light? I repeated. What light? The boy looked up at the sky. His eyes stayed trained on it, unblinking. The one that follows the road. I followed his gaze, but all I saw were low clouds, thick and gray, glowing faintly with leftover daylight. You mean like headlights? I tried, feeling my chest tighten a little for reasons I couldn't explain. No, the girl said. The other light. I didn't know what to say to that. The air around us felt heavier than before, like it had gained weight. Even the usual evening breeze had stopped. Everything was too still. Are you too lost? I asked. Do your parents know where you are? They didn't react. The bench creaked slightly as I shifted. The girl took another step closer, and when the bus shelter light flickered above us, I saw her eyes clearly for the first time. Black, not dark brown. Black, fully. No whites, no reflections. Just two flat voids staring in my direction, though not exactly at me, more like past me. My heart thumped so hard I could feel it in my throat. I stood up without meaning to. Listen, I don't think this is the right bus stop, for the pavement hummed. It started faint, like a vibration running through the soles of my shoes. I thought at first it was a truck coming from down the road, but there was no engine noise, no lights, nothing moving. The hum grew stronger. The metal bench rattled against the concrete slab. The loose sign above us buzzed like it was going to shake free. The air felt charged, like static before a storm, but there was no wind. Not even a stray leaf moved. The boy's head tilted slightly upward. It's arriving, he said. A deep pressure pulsed upward from the ground, not painful, but overwhelming, like standing too close to an enormous speaker playing a sound below human hearing. Then the sky brightened. A soft glow formed behind the clouds. It wasn't moonlight. The moon wasn't out. It wasn't lightning either. It was steady, growing, spreading across the cloud cover like a giant lamp was being lowered above the whole road. The girl looked up, her face calm. It sees us. I stumbled backward, staring at the clouds. The glow intensified, turning the entire sky above us into a pale, artificial-looking sheet of white. The brightness didn't bleed to the horizon. It was concentrated right over the bus stop, right over the road. My breath came out in quick bursts. I squinted against the glare, feeling the hum travel up my legs and into my chest. Then the light blinked out. Not dimmed, not faded. Blink. Gone. Instant silence replaced the humming. The air relaxed. The bench stopped vibrating. The night returned like someone flipped a switch. I blinked hard, trying to get my eyes to adjust. Spots floated across my vision. My pulse pounded so loudly it was all I could hear. When my sight cleared, I turned to the kids. They weren't there. Not walking away. Not hiding behind the shelter. Not anywhere. Just gone. The space beside the bench was empty. The patch of dirt in front of the shelter was undisturbed. There was no sound in the fields or the woods. Nothing. I walked out into the road, turning in a full circle, half expecting them to reappear. The darkness felt different, emptier, like something had just moved through and left everything hollow behind it. My bus didn't come for another 8 minutes. I spent the whole time standing in the middle of the road, staring at the sky, waiting for another flash I hoped wouldn't happen. When the bus finally arrived, the driver looked at me funny. "You all right? Looks like you've seen a ghost." I mumbled something about the lights flickering and took a seat. The bus shook normally when it hit bumps, but every vibration made me jump. At home, I told my mom the bus was just late. I didn't mention the kids, or the humming, or the light. But the next morning, when I walked past that bus stop on my way to school, I noticed something odd. The metal bench had shifted 3 inches to the left. I could see the clean outline in the dirt where it used to be. No one had been out there during the night. No trucks, no workers, and the bench was too heavy to push easily. It bolted into the slab. I still wait for the bus there sometimes, but I don't sit on the bench anymore. And every time the sky looks cloudy, I keep my eyes down. I was driving from Kingman, Arizona to Barstow one night in late August. It was close to midnight, and I'd been on the road for hours already. The desert was empty. No other cars, no towns for miles, just open space and heat still rising off the asphalt even after dark. Had the windows down, radio low, cruise control on. The sky was clear, one of those nights where the stars look close enough to touch. I was supposed to be in Barstow by 1 or 2, depending on how many times I stopped. I'd done this route plenty before. I work maintenance for a solar contractor, and sometimes I have to check on panels out near Needles or Mojave, so I know the stretch of I-40 pretty well. I've seen all kinds of weird stuff out there. Heat mirages, old billboards lit by nothing, even a stray pack of dogs once. But this was different. Around midnight, maybe a little after, my dashboard lights started flickering. The speedometer needle twitched, then the radio cut out mid-song. I thought it was just the battery connection or maybe the alternator. I tapped the dash like an idiot, but everything went dark. Headlights, gauges, AC, all of it. Even the engine. No sputter, no warning, just dead. I coasted onto the shoulder, steering as best I could with no power. When I stopped, the silence hit me. You don't realize how much noise a running car makes until it stops completely. No hum, no fan, not even the click of the cooling engine. Just the wind moving through the desert. I tried the ignition again. Nothing. No lights, no sound, not even the ding from the keys. I popped the hood, grabbed my flashlight from the glove box, and got out. The air was still warm, but it had that dry bite to it. Sand crunched under my boots. I lifted the hood. Everything looked normal. No smell of burning, no smoke, no loose wires I could see. I stood there for a minute, just listening. Then I noticed how quiet it was. Not normal desert quiet either. No insects, no wind, no distant semis, just dead air, the kind that presses on your ears. My flashlight beam felt small against all that emptiness. I kept expecting to hear a coyote or something, but there was nothing. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was headlights cresting a hill in the distance, but it wasn't coming from the ground. It was a white light, bright but not blinding. Gliding over the highway, maybe a quarter mile ahead, completely silent. It didn't pulse or flash, just moved smooth and steady across the road, like it was scanning it. My first thought was a drone, but it was too big, too fluid. There were no red or green navigation lights, no buzz of rotors. It was just floating. I froze behind the hood, watching. The light didn't seem to notice me or my car. It moved from left to right across the asphalt, then paused over the center of the road. The desert around it lit up pale white, the kind of light that makes everything lose its shadows. The sand, the sagebrush, even the guardrail, all looked flat, like the light wasn't coming from above, but from everywhere at once. Then it stopped moving completely. I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe 10 seconds, maybe a minute. My flashlight flickered once, even though the batteries were new. Then, without any sound, the white light shot straight up. Not like a flare or a rocket, no trail, no acceleration curve. Just gone. 1 second it was hovering over the road, and the next it was a pinprick in the sky blending with the stars. Everything was dark again. I lowered the hood and got back in the car, heartbeat loud in my ears. I tried the key again, expecting nothing, but the dashboard lights came on immediately. Radio kicked back in mid-sentence, AC blasting. The engine turned over like nothing had happened. I just sat there for a minute, gripping the wheel. I looked at my phone, and the clock read 12:43 a.m. I couldn't remember what time it had been when the car died. It felt like maybe 5 minutes had passed, but I wasn't sure. I turned the radio down, put it in drive, and eased back onto the highway. A few miles later, I started noticing other strange things. My GPS kept losing signal, flipping between coordinates that didn't make sense. My phone screen glitched out twice. Just white static, no text, then went back to normal. The temperature gauge on the dash stayed stuck for 10 minutes before dropping suddenly to normal levels. I told myself it was all just fallout from whatever electrical issue I'd had. Then I saw the same light again, way out over the desert to my right. Farther this time, just above the horizon. It wasn't moving, just hanging there. I slowed down, half expecting it to be a plane lining up for landing somewhere distant, but there were no airports anywhere nearby. The light brightened for a second, then dimmed until it vanished completely. I didn't stop again. When I finally reached the next gas station, I pulled in and parked under the lights. There were 2 other cars there, truckers mostly, and I felt stupid even thinking about what I'd seen. I went inside, grabbed a soda, and asked the clerk if the power had flickered recently. She looked at me weird and said no, not that she knew of. I told her my car had shut off for a few minutes back on 40, and she shrugged, said maybe it was the heat. I checked under the hood again before leaving. Everything still looked fine. Battery terminals were tight, no corrosion, no leaks. My flashlight worked perfectly again, no flicker this time. The whole thing made less and less sense the more I thought about it. I made it to Barstow around 2:30, checked into a cheap motel, parked right outside the window. I left the blinds half open so I could see the car. Around 4 in the morning, I woke up for no reason. The room was quiet, air conditioner humming, everything normal. I looked outside, the car was there, untouched. But in the distance, beyond the highway lights, I saw a faint white glow low on the horizon. Not moving, just sitting there. Could have been a distant plane or some kind of tower. I watched it until my eyes watered and then it faded out. I went back to bed and didn't drive that route again for months. When I finally did, in daylight, I pulled over around where it had happened. I thought maybe I'd find something. Tire marks, a piece of debris, anything. But there was nothing. Just the same cracked asphalt, the same guardrail, the same silence. Even the air felt heavy again when I stood there, like sound didn't carry right. I've had the car checked since then, twice. Mechanics say everything's perfect. Alternator, battery, wiring, all clean. They looked at me funny when I tried to explain how everything had just shut off. I stopped trying to explain after that. Sometimes late at night, when I drive through quieter stretches of desert, I still turn off the radio just to listen. Not for the hum of the road or the wind, but for that silence, that total suffocating stillness that feels too big to belong to you. And once or twice out of the corner of my eye, I've caught a white flicker over the edge of the horizon, always there for half a second longer than it should be. I woke up before the alarm that morning, which was unusual. My little cabin on Lake Crescent in Washington doesn't exactly encourage early rising, but the fog had rolled in heavy overnight, and I guess I was stirred by the light creeping around the window frames. I grabbed my thermos, threw on a jacket, and walked down the narrow dock. The water was flat, no wind, just that thick morning mist that makes the world feel swallowed whole. I put the small aluminum boat in the water, started the motor, and headed toward my usual spot near the old cedar stumps, a quarter-mile out from shore. The lake was gray and quiet, like it had absorbed sound overnight. Ducks floated by, but even they didn't make a noise. I leaned on the oars for a minute, just letting the motor idle, watching the fog swirl across the surface. I'd fished this lake for years, so I know the patterns. I dropped a line, looked down at the water, and that's when I noticed it. A reflection, bright and sharp. Not the sun, it wasn't up yet, and not the fog glinting. It was a triangle, a perfect geometric shape, hovering right over the water's surface, about the size of a canoe. Its edges were clean, almost glowing. The weird part, when I looked straight up, there was nothing. Just the gray sky and mist. I blinked a few times, thinking maybe it was the reflection of the cabin's light bouncing off my boat, or a trick of the fog. But as I scanned the lake, the shape stayed there, hovering in the reflection, even as I adjusted my position. I leaned forward, squinting. The triangle was perfectly mirrored on the water's surface, like it existed only there. I reached for my phone to take a picture, hands still damp from condensation, and noticed it was dead, fully dead. No charging icon, no flicker, Nothing. That was strange, but not impossible. Phones die all the time. I shrugged, set it down, and focused on the triangle. Then it moved. Not like a fish swimming, not like drifting debris. It slid sideways across the water, perfectly parallel to the boat, maintaining its distance. I gripped the oars, thinking maybe I'd misjudged perspective. But no matter which way I leaned, the triangle stayed aligned with my view. I started paddling slowly toward it, and as I got closer, I noticed the reflection wasn't showing anything underneath. The water around it was calm, no ripples or waves, nothing moving. I tapped the surface with the paddle, just water. But the reflection didn't budge, it didn't distort. It stayed exactly the same size and shape, moving with me, almost like it was aware of my position. I stopped rowing and sat there for a few minutes. The fog started thinning a bit, the first streaks of dawn showing pink against the gray, and then the shape flickered, like a light being dimmed and brightened twice in a row. I thought maybe I was imagining it, fatigue playing tricks. But I've been out on this lake alone at dawn hundreds of times, and I know the difference between a shadow on water and something else. Then a faint vibration ran through the boat, subtle but real, like the kind you feel when the motor is running on high for too long. But my motor was idling. I reached down to check the cable connection, half expecting a loose wire, but everything was fine. The vibration stopped as soon as I lifted my hand. The reflection shifted again. This time it pulsed, brighter, wider, like it was expanding for a second, then snapping back to the original triangle. I leaned over, trying to see some sort of object in the sky. Nothing. Just mist, pale light, and the top of the surrounding evergreens. I even spun the boat slowly, looking in every direction. Still nothing. Then the water itself changed. The area under the triangle went completely still. No mist drifting over it, no ripples from the slight wind, nothing. It was like the water had become a mirror only for that shape. I reached out to touch the surface, and for a moment, it seemed like my hand hesitated just above it, as if the water was denser there. Then normal again. I pulled the line in, heart beating faster than usual for a quiet morning. Nothing caught, of course. Nothing could. My hands were trembling a little, which isn't like me. I took a deep breath and started slowly paddling back toward the cabin, keeping my eyes on the reflection. As I got closer to the shore, the triangle began to fade. Not gradually, more like someone dimmed a switch. The bright, perfect edges softened, blurred, then disappeared completely. I stopped rowing for a moment, staring at the calm lake, half expecting it to reappear. Nothing. Just the ordinary fog and the ripples from the morning breeze. By the time I tied the boat to the dock, the sun had started to peek over the hills. The lake looked normal again. Nothing out of place. Ducks quacked, wind ruffled the reeds. The entire experience, all 30 or 40 minutes, felt like it had never happened. Back in the cabin, I tried my phone again. Dead still. I plugged it into the wall. The charging light came on immediately, battery showing 100%. All the notifications I would have missed were already gone, like they never existed. I poured some coffee and sat on the porch, staring at the water. I told myself I was tired, seeing tricks in the fog, imagining reflections where there weren't any. But it didn't feel like that. It felt like whatever I saw didn't belong to the physical world, but interacted with it anyway. A few days later, I asked around the marina if anyone else had seen anything weird in the fog over the lake. No one had. Some old-timers laughed it off, said the mist plays tricks, makes shapes where there are none. I wanted to tell them about the reflection and the pulsing light, but I didn't. It sounded insane. I go out fishing often, same lake, same hours, but I haven't seen it since. Sometimes I wake before dawn, fog heavy over the water, and I get that feeling again. Like something's just beneath the surface, waiting. But when I push off in the boat, nothing shows. Still, every time the morning mist rolls in thick, I glance down at the water, half expecting that bright triangle to appear. Even knowing it probably won't, I can't help looking. Something about it didn't belong, and the lake hasn't been the same since. I've tried to recreate it, different angles, early light, reflections from cabin lights, nothing. There's no explanation, and maybe there never will be. I just know what I saw, a triangle, perfectly reflected, moving in ways water can't, fading before I could reach it, leaving the lake calm and ordinary again. And that's the thing, it wasn't threatening, not really, just impossible, out of place. It stayed in the world long enough for me to see, but short enough that I could never prove it existed. It left me with nothing but the memory, the fog, and a lake that seems quieter now than it did before. I was lying on the hood of my Jeep, looking straight up and thinking about nothing in particular, when one of the stars moved. I'd driven out past San Miguel that night because the sky out there is stupidly clear. No light dome from town, no low clouds, just the river of stars you get when you're far enough from asphalt. My buddy, Carlos, had given me the spot. A flat pullout off a dirt road, a low ridge to block the highway glow. I had a thermos of coffee, a blanket, and a cheap pair of binoculars. It was around 11:30. Cold enough that the coffee steamed in the cup, but not so cold I regretted being out. Before anything odd happened, the night was doing its usual quiet work. Crickets in the scrub, the distant, muffled rumble of a semi on a state route, the near constant hiss of my breath. I lay there on my back, binoculars tilted at the Milky Way, and ticked off constellations in my head the way I used to as a kid. Orion, a little lower than I remembered. Cassiopeia like a W. I could even pick out a satellite or two crawling along the edge of the sky. The first thing that made me frown was the radio. I had the little FM shoved under the dash on for company, nothing but static most of the time, and it started to pick up a voice, not music, not a station I knew. It was faint, a fast jumble of syllables I couldn't make sense of, like someone talking through a mouthful of ice. I tuned, caught a phrase that sounded almost like my name, then the signal collapsed back to hiss. I reset the dial and it was just static again. I shrugged. Signals do weird things in the desert sometimes. Reflections off terrain, somebody's CB picking up long distance. Then my dog, Maggie, who'd curled in the passenger seat and been asleep, sat up and stared toward the ridge. She didn't bark, she just watched, ears forward, the kind of intent animals get when the world rearranges. The hair on her neck stood up. A few seconds later, she laid back down like nothing had happened. That was the second odd thing. Small and unthreatening, but it made me more aware. You notice things more when you realize you'd missed a beat. A breeze came out of nowhere and dropped as quickly as it arrived, making the leaves on the mesquite whisper, then go still. The temperature dipped a notch that I could feel in my fingertips. Not a big drop, just enough to make me pull the blanket tighter. I checked the screen of my phone. I'd put it on airplane mode to save battery, and since there was no signal anyway, and it registered the time wrong by 30 seconds. Little glitches. Nothing that demanded action. I lay back down and let my eyes find patterns. That's when I noticed a star that shouldn't have been where it was. At first, I thought it was my brain playing tricks. When you stare at the same spot for too long, the sky seems to breathe. But this was different. The star moved laterally, not the slow, predictable drift caused by Earth's rotation, but a shift against the background constellations. It slid maybe half a degree to the right, which doesn't sound like much until you're used to the sky being dead still. It didn't brighten or color change. It just changed position in a way that didn't match anything I know about orbital mechanics. I sat up on my elbows. The rest of the sky stayed perfectly still. Orion was where Orion should be. The dim smudge of the Andromeda Galaxy was unmoving and polite. Only this one point of light had shifted. I blinked hard, looked again with the binoculars. The star, if it was a star, was now in a place that made no sense. It kept moving, smoothly, like someone nudging a pin on a map. I'll admit I laughed out loud in a tiny, embarrassed way. There's a long list of things people see out here that turn out to be normal once you check. Satellites, aircraft, reflections, meteor trails. But this didn't match. The star moved for maybe 3 seconds in total, slow enough to see it slide, but fast enough that it felt like watching someone lift an object and place it down on the tabletop. Then, as if it had remembered where it belonged, it snapped back, like someone pressed a key. Click, back in place. When it snapped, my stomach dropped in this small, stunned way. Not terror, just the immediate dissonance of the world not following its rules for a heartbeat. I reached for my phone to record the patch of sky. The camera app stuttered on launch the way it had earlier by my watch. I fumbled and finally got footage, but when I played it back, there was a blank half second where the star had moved. The rest of the clip was normal. No artifact, no blur except that hole. I checked the timestamp. It showed exactly when I'd seen it. The file compression had eaten the middle of the event. I tried to describe it to myself in technical terms: lens flare, atmospheric refraction. I thought about plane lights reflecting off high cloud. The sky above me was a sheet of black with pinpricks. There were no clouds. If anything, an aircraft would leave a streak or blink. This slid. It allowed no simple explanation. I sat up. The coffee had gone tepid hours ago. My hands smelled faintly of it. The radio chirped again, and this time I heard real words. A cadence like a voice speaking too fast. North, north. Then nothing. The signal dropped like someone had gone out of range. Maggie stirred and put her head on my knee, eyes half closed, like she'd been pretending to sleep. I walked a little toward the ridge to get a better angle. The desert around the pullout was a flat bowl, a small scrub, and the washed-out tire tracks of other folks who'd come for the dark. Ahead, the land fell away to a black gorge where I could hear the faint, pure sound of the river if I concentrated. As I stepped, my headlamp clicked on. Not mine. I hadn't turned it. I fumbled to switch it off. The battery indicator showed full, but when I checked the device, it was damp along the rim. Probably condensation, I told myself. The hair on my arms was prickling again. I tried to be methodical. I scanned the horizon with binoculars. I checked the GPS watch. It took a long time to get a fix. The automatic setting on my dashboard chose an AM station instead of the FM static, and carried a cowboy song for a minute before collapsing again into hiss. These little failures are like dominoes. You don't notice one, but a bunch together make a pattern you can't ignore. Another second strange thing. Off to the east, near the river, a small grid of white dots blinked in unison, maybe a dozen of them, then dimmed and vanished. Not a firefly pattern, not animals. They were neat, deliberate, like light bulbs switched on at once and then off. The sound of the night shrank. Less insect noise, fewer distant car tires, like the world had pulled its volume down. I stayed until the sky began to thin at horizon, gray light crawling like a slow tide. When the bright band of dawn started, everything looked like it always had. The star that had moved was back in its place, painfully ordinary. The radio worked. My phone battery read 62% as if nothing had happened. The binoculars were fogged on the inside rim where I'd breathed a little too hard. I packed the gear and drove back to town with no plan. Only this feeling of having seen something that hadn't wanted me to keep watching. For the next week, I told the story to anyone who'd listen. Half laughing, half serious. Carlos shrugged and said maybe it was an unusual satellite, maybe a test. My sister asked if I'd had anything to drink, which was funny. I drink coffee on these trips because I'm too old for anything else. I checked star charts online and amateur astronomy boards until my head hurt. People offered me comets, rare atmospheric phenomena, military equipment. None of the answers lined up cleanly. A month later, I went back. Same pullout, same thermos, same blanket. The desert was as patient as ever. I sat under the Milky Way like an old habit and watched, thinking maybe repetition would teach me how it had happened. For a long time, nothing odd happened. The stars moved their usual slow arc. Satellites drew thin lines. An owl called from the wash. I thought the episode had been personal. That was the worst part, being the only witness to something that folded back into normal. Then, maybe near midnight, I noticed a tiny shift in the sky's texture. Nothing like a star moving now, just a subtle shimmer, like heat over asphalt. It lasted a breath and then smoothed out. I felt the prickle of a tension in my skin and realized I still wanted answers, even if the answers were only to know I hadn't gone entirely mad that first night. I packed up and left when the sky went gray. On the dirt road back toward town, the Jeep's headlights picked up the shape of a billboard with a faded ad. The light from it was warm and steady. For a moment, for a stupid heartbeat, I expected it to slide a few inches to the left like that star had. It didn't. I don't have any tidy explanation. I don't know whether some small patch of sky decided to test the rules or whether my mind caught a fluke both physical and unremarkable. What I have is the memory of that one bright pin moving like a thing with intent, the coffee cooling in the thermos, the way time goes back to ordinary, and the strange quiet after it snapped back. I still go out sometimes because the sky is right there, and because if something odd happens again, I want to be paying attention. I was working the night shift at a gas station off Highway 70 in northern New Mexico, the kind of place people only stop at because there's nothing else for 50 miles in either direction. It was late June, hot even after midnight, the kind of heat that sticks to everything. I was halfway through my shift, alone, trying to stay awake by restocking shelves and wiping down the counter for the third time. The night had been dead quiet until around 2:15 a.m. when the sky outside lit up. Not like lightning, more like someone set off a massive camera flash across the desert. For a second, everything was white. I saw every grain of dust in the air, every shadow cast sharp and wrong against the windows. The lights in the store flickered, but they didn't go out. I stepped outside to look, but by then it was dark again. No sound, no trail, nothing in the sky, just silence. Even the insects had stopped. A few minutes later, I saw headlights coming down the highway, two bright beams moving fast, then slowing as they turned into the lot. A black car, some kind of older model sedan, shiny like it was just washed. It rolled up to pump 3, but didn't stop there. Instead, it pulled around and parked along the side of the building where no one usually parks. I remember thinking that was weird, because most people who come through at that hour either want gas or directions. Nobody just parks and sits. I went back behind the counter pretending to look busy, but I kept glancing up at the glass door. After maybe a minute, the bell over it rang. Two men walked in. They were dressed in black suits, real suits, like you'd wear to a funeral. Both had white shirts, black ties, black shoes that looked new. Their clothes were spotless, which stood out because dust gets on everything out there. Even if you just walk from your car to the door, you track it in. They were tall, both around the same height, pale, clean-shaven. I couldn't tell their age. Something about their faces made it hard to pin down. Not young, not old, just blank. Neither of them said anything. They didn't look at me. They walked in perfect step toward the coffee station at the back of the store. I remember the sound of their shoes. It wasn't loud, but each step hit the same rhythm like they'd practiced. I asked if they needed help. No response. Not even a glance. They just stood there by the coffee machine, one on each side of it, not doing anything. No cups, no pouring, nothing, just standing perfectly still. I tried again. Hey, you guys okay? Nothing. Not even a twitch. I started to feel that tight feeling in my chest, like when something's wrong, but you can't explain why yet. I thought maybe they were drunk or high, but they didn't move like that. They were too still. A car passed on the highway, its headlights sweeping through the windows. When the light hit them, both of them turned their heads at the exact same moment. Slow, smooth. Their faces caught the light for a second, and I swear it looked like their skin reflected it wrong. Flat, like wax. They turned back toward the wall again. I didn't know what to do, so I went to the back office to call my boss, Gary. The line rang a few times before he picked up. I started to tell him about the flash and the two men, but as I was talking, the line cut out. No click, no static, just silence. I hung up and tried again, but the phone was dead. When I came back out to the counter, the men were gone. The door hadn't chimed, and I hadn't heard a car. I stepped outside, looked around the lot. The black sedan wasn't there either, just empty highway stretching both ways. I went back in and checked the clock. It was 2:37 a.m. Somehow 20 minutes had passed. The rest of the shift was quiet. Too quiet. I kept checking the windows, expecting headlights to come back down the road, but they never did. When the morning guy showed up, Eli, I told him what happened. He laughed at first, thought I was messing with him, until I mentioned the flash. He said he'd seen it too, driving in from town, though he figured it was some kind of explosion or maybe a transformer blowing. We pulled up the security footage to check. At first, everything looked normal. I saw myself behind the counter, then stepping outside when the flash happened. The camera caught that perfectly. The desert went white for a frame or two, then back to dark. A few minutes later, the black sedan rolled in. Both men got out and walked inside. That's when we noticed it. Their faces were blurred. Not pixelated like bad resolution, but smeared, like someone had taken an eraser to just that part of the image. Every other detail was sharp. Their suits, shoes, even the pattern on the floor tiles, but their faces looked like fog. We thought maybe it was a glitch, so we rewound and paused. Same thing. Every frame, blurred faces. Even when they turned toward the camera, it never caught a single clear shot. Then we watched the footage from when I went into the office. On the screen, you could see me walk back there, and in the background, the men were still standing at the coffee station. But when I came back out a few minutes later, they were gone. No door opening, no movement, nothing. Just gone. Eli asked if maybe I'd edited it, which pissed me off because why would I bother? But then he looked closer and pointed something out I hadn't noticed. When the men disappeared, the clock in the corner of the footage skipped from 2:28 to 2:37, same time gap I'd seen on the register. We checked the outside cameras next. The one pointing at the pumps caught the black sedan pulling up, but not leaving. It just sat there, parked along the wall until 2:28, and then the feed jumped. Next frame, the car was gone. The weirdest part was the reflection. The windows of the station showed a faint reflection of the pumps and the lot, and in that reflection, you could still see the car for a few frames after it was gone from the camera's main view. Then the reflection blinked out too. Eli stopped the playback and didn't say anything for a while. Then he told me not to talk about it, said Gary wouldn't believe it and we'd both just sound crazy. I worked the next few nights, nothing out of the ordinary. But every time a car came down the highway, my heart would jump a little. I'd find myself staring at the door, waiting for that chime, for those two to come back. About a week later, I came in for another overnight shift and noticed the hard drive for the security system was gone. The case was still there, but the drive that held all the recordings had been removed. I asked Gary about it, and he said someone from corporate came by that afternoon to replace it. He didn't know who exactly, said the guy showed him a work order and took it. When I asked what company he was from, Gary just said he was wearing a black suit. I quit a month later. Now, whenever I'm driving home late and see a flash in the sky, I don't stop to look. I just keep driving. But sometimes, when I pass by that old station, it's closed down now, boarded up, I swear I still see a black car parked along the side of the building. Just sitting there, lights off. I never stop to check. It was late September, just after Labor Day weekend, when I drove up to Greeley, Colorado to meet a contact about an old UFO sighting from the 70s. I'd been interviewing people for a podcast I ran with a couple of friends, mostly about weird local history, missing planes, unexplained lights, that kind of thing. I wasn't any kind of expert, but I liked collecting stories. That week, I'd been digging through old newspapers at the university library and planned to meet one of the retired ranchers who'd reported strange lights over his fields decades earlier. I stopped at a small diner outside of town called Penny's Place. It was one of those squat buildings off the highway with a faded neon sign and cracked asphalt parking lot, wedged between a feed store and a closed-down gas station. The kind of place where you could still smoke out back, and the waitress knew every regular by name. It was a gray morning, misty, cold enough that the windows were fogged on the inside. There were maybe 4 other people in the place, 2 truckers at the counter, a couple in a corner booth, and the waitress, a middle-aged woman named Darla, who kept refilling coffee without asking. I took a booth by the window and spread out my notes, old photocopies of newspaper clippings about something called the Sterling Light, which people described as a silver disc that hovered over a wheat field for nearly an hour before vanishing. I was halfway through a cold omelet when 2 men walked in. They didn't look local. Both tall, thin, wearing black suits and white shirts, no ties. They didn't take their hats off, even inside. The fabric looked too perfect, like brand new suits from a store window that hadn't wrinkled yet. One was pale, maybe mid-40s, with slick dark hair. The other looked older, but his skin had that odd, stretched quality, smooth but too tight, like wax. They walked straight over to my booth without hesitation. "Mr. Halverson?" the pale one asked. That threw me. I hadn't used my full name for the podcast or online. I nodded anyway. "Yeah, that's me." "May we sit?" the other said. His voice had a flat, metallic quality. Not robotic exactly, but like someone who learned English from an audiobook. They slid into the booth opposite me, perfectly synchronized, movements crisp and identical. I tried to play it cool, folding my papers, but something about the way they both smiled at the exact same moment made my stomach twist. "You've been researching incidents," the older one said. He didn't blink much. Specifically, aerial phenomena. Yeah, I said slowly. Public records, mostly old cases. Have you shared your findings? With who? With anyone. I frowned. It's a podcast. I share them every week. They both tilted their heads slightly, like birds reacting to a noise. The pale one reached into his jacket and pulled out a small notebook, flipping it open. And the sterling light. What do you intend to do with that story? I shrugged. Just talk to someone who was there. Maybe record the interview. Their eyes didn't move when they talked. They just stared, unblinking. The older one smiled again, and this time I noticed his lips weren't quite in sync with the words. It was subtle, like bad dubbing in a movie, his mouth forming the sounds a split second late. You should consider discontinuing your work, he said, for your own well-being. Excuse me? The pale one added, it is not productive to examine what does not exist. I gave a short laugh, thinking maybe they were screwing with me, some prank from a local skeptic group. But their faces didn't change. Who are you with? I asked. They looked at each other, and again it was like a mirror, same motion, same timing. Then they both smiled. Wide, identical smiles that didn't reach their eyes. We're with an oversight department, the older one said. Which department? They didn't answer. Just stood up together, smoothed their jackets, and walked out. No check, no coffee, no hesitation. I sat there for a minute, staring at the door, half expecting them to come back in. My hands were shaking a little. I gathered my papers and went to the counter. Darla looked up from the coffee pot. You all right, hon? You look like you saw a ghost. Those two guys, I said, in the black suits. Do they come in here often? She frowned. What two guys? The ones I was just talking to. They were sitting with me. I turned to point, but the booth was empty. My half-eaten omelet was there, the papers, my coffee, but only one mug. Darla wiped her hands on her apron. You've been sitting alone since you walked in. You sure you're feeling okay? I just stared at her. No. There were two men. Never mind. She gave me this concerned look, poured me a fresh cup, and walked away. I sat there for a long time, trying to piece together what had just happened. I remembered their smell. Not cologne, not sweat, just nothing. Completely scentless. And how their clothes didn't seem to crease when they sat. When I finally got outside, their car should have been obvious. The lot was small, maybe a dozen spaces. My truck was the only vehicle there besides an old Ford that looked abandoned. No black sedan, no sign of anyone leaving. I drove off anyway, half glancing at my mirrors the whole time. About 10 miles down the highway, I noticed a dark vehicle behind me. Could have been black, could have been dark blue. I couldn't tell through the mist. It kept its distance, following at a steady pace for at least 5 miles. When I turned off toward the rancher's place, it didn't follow. The interview that afternoon felt off too. The old man, Frank Leary, was jumpy, kept looking toward the windows like he was waiting for someone. When I mentioned I'd stopped at Penny's place, he froze mid-sentence. They still open that place? He asked. Yeah, I said. Had breakfast there this morning. He stared for a second, then said, You see anyone in suits there? That made my chest tighten. Why? Just wondering, he said, and went quiet for the rest of the conversation. I left a little after sunset. The air had gone colder, fog settling low over the road. My phone lost service for a few miles near the county line. I kept glancing in the rear view, half expecting that same car to show up again. Nothing did. That night, back at the motel, I went over the audio I'd recorded from my meeting with Frank. Most of it was clear, but near the end, right when he asked about the diner, the background filled with a low, rhythmic hum. Not static, not interference. Almost like breathing, close to the microphone. When I tried to replay the part in the diner where I'd talked to the two men, there was nothing. I hadn't even turned the recorder on. I was sure I had. The next morning, when I went back to the diner, Penny's place was closed. A handwritten sign on the door said, closed until further notice. The blinds were drawn tight and there were no cars out front. I called the number on the receipt from the day before. Disconnected. I still have the notebook they looked at. Not mine. The pale one must have left it on the table. Plain black cover, no writing, no logo. The pages inside are blank except for a single phrase written neatly on the first page. Do not speak of what is seen. I don't know how it ended up in my stack of papers or why I didn't notice until later that night. I just know I stopped working on the Sterling Lights story after that.